Chapter 802. Jining could choose not to say these things. He could even stand up and leave. He believed that Yang Chendong would not stop him. After all, he was just a chief eunuch. Not only would killing him not have any effect, it would also force the emperor to act against him. But in the end, he did not choose to do so. This was because he knew that Ming already had many enemies. In the south, there was Zhu Qishan from the Ming sect, and in the north, there was the powerful Walla army. If he were to openly fight with loyalty, his opponent would definitely be happy to see it happen. And even if he defeated Yang Chendong in the end, so what? He would have to sacrifice 800 of his own men to kill 1,000 of his enemies. When that time came, would they be able to stop the unharmed Ming and Walla? Of course, Jining did not know that if they were to fight, he would be the one to lose. Yang Chendong was known as the god of war. How could he not be prepared to do something that would anger the southern Ming Empire? Putting aside the fact that there was already a regiment led by Xiao Feng in the capital to provide support at any time, with their strong military quality and excellent weapons and equipment, they would be able to hold out for a period of time. If something were to happen here, a telegram would be sent to Tiger's Mane in the first city, and tens of thousands of elite cavalry would descend from Tulu City. They would first attack the Xian Mansion and then take Juyong Pass. At that time, it would not be difficult for them to carry out a coup d'état. This was where Yang Chendong's confidence came from. So-called negotiations might require a certain amount of psychological tactics, but in the end, it still depended on who was stronger. If one did not have enough strength, even if one had a glib tongue, what could they do? They would only be able to delay for a period of time. Yang Chendong was gambling. He was gambling that Zhu Qiyu was a smart person and would not think of starting a war with him first. Just like himself, he didn't want to make an enemy out of Ming. After all, with the first city, it meant that he had formed a certain amount of power in the Mongolian territory. Once he went to war with Ming and faced an army of millions. Even if he won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. He might even be attacked by the grassland tribes and even the southern Ming Empire. If that happened, everything that he had done in the grassland for the past year might go up in smoke. As someone whose dream was to lead the Han people to the top of the world, one could imagine how precious time was. Furthermore, without sufficient military strength and manpower, even if Ming were to surrender, he would not be able to replan this place. Since that was the case, it was better to put it aside for now. Rather than forcing himself to eat a piece of fatty meat that was much bigger than himself and causing indigestion, it was better not to eat it and continue to recuperate. Ming's existence could also help him share some of the firepower from southern Ming and Walla. Both sides had the same idea. Neither of them wanted to start a war. This was the condition that the two of them could sit down and talk. Yang Chendong immediately mentioned that he wanted to take his wives away. This was to use his power to suppress others. This was also the basic point of negotiation. If they didn't even have this consensus, there was naturally no need for other people to negotiate. Fortunately, Jining had met Zhu Qiyu before coming and guessed what Yang Chendong would say, and even what kind of request he would make. The two wives' departure was also within their expectations. In ancient times, the status of women was very low. Even if they left the two wives behind, could they guarantee that they would not join Ming in a fight when Yang Chendong was powerful? In ancient times, when there were wars, not to mention concubines, even when one's own son was in the hands of the other party, both sides would suddenly start fighting. Was there a lack of such things? Just from this point alone, if Qiaoyin and Lady Xiang really thought that they could restrain Yang Chendong, that would be even more ridiculous. In the end, Jining was still so agitated even though she knew all this. In the end, she was just testing him. From the looks of it, the test had been very successful. Yang Chendong's determination to win gave Jean Ying the idea that the other party still had a trump card. As for how the negotiations would proceed from here on out, Jean Ying had even more plans in his mind. If the two wives insist on leaving with the Duke of Loyalty, then what about the Immortal Abode and Outer Heaven Trading Company? Our Biming is vast and has abundant resources. We can make quite a bit of money here. Jean Ying didn't continue to harp on the matter of the wives. Instead, his gaze fell on these profitable businesses. Ever since Yang Chendong left Biming in the spring of last year and returned to Jianing Manor in the south to pay respects to his ancestors, he promised to give Zhu Qiyu 20% of the shares in these two businesses. This was something that couldn't be helped. If one wanted to establish a foothold in other people's territory, one couldn't obtain protection without paying a certain price. This was also why Biming had turned a blind eye to Yang Chendong's strength, even though they knew that Yang Chendong's strength was constantly growing. There were even quite a few pieces of information that proved that the so-called mercenary leader was a fake, and that Yang Chendong really was in charge of everything. This was precisely because of the benefits involved. The current Biming could already be described as militaristic. For the sake of increasing their military strength, they were constantly training new soldiers and manufacturing new firearms. They even had an artillery battalion. The construction of all these things required money. In addition, the Great Ming dynasty was originally rich in the south and poor in the north. Biming's establishment had already taken away too much of the benefits. If one really wanted to rely on Biming's tax revenue to accomplish these things, it would be no different from a fool's dream. However, Zhu Qiyu had still managed to do it, and he'd done quite well at that. Wasn't it precisely because of the income these two businesses brought to the imperial court, not to mention the Immortal Abode? Even if business was good, it was impossible for a restaurant to bring in that much income. However, just the realm beyond Heaven Trading Company alone brought in over 1 million taels of silver every month. 20% was 200,000 taels of silver. That was more than 3 million taels of silver in a year. This was definitely a number that couldn't be ignored. It was also the source of Zhu Qiyu's confidence. The two wives could leave, but the businesses definitely couldn't be let go. Otherwise, if they really started to fight, it would be disastrous. Under Jean Ying's nervous expression, Yang Chendong lightly nodded and said, "The businesses won't be touched. Not only that, but I will also increase the flow of business here. If the mercenaries want to establish themselves in the grasslands, they will need more logistical supplies. After all, New-er is still a bit too far from the capital. If possible, it would be better to transport goods through the capital. This way, Biming's monthly income will be much higher." Transporting military supplies from Biming to the front lines was a good way to quickly strengthen the mercenaries in the beginning city. Logically speaking, Zhu Qiyu and the imperial court of Biming didn't want to see them become stronger because of this. However, the problem now was that Biming's military expenditure mainly came from Yang Chendong's business tax. Even if they knew everything, they couldn't refuse. This was an open and above-board scheme. This was like building a highway and wanting to collect tolls. Then, more cars would need to travel on this road. Even if they knew that they would receive more benefits by transporting goods on this road, not only could they not stop them, they even had to warmly welcome them. Yes, I will ask the emperor to make a decision on this matter. Although Jean Ying knew that Zhu Qiyu would definitely agree, she still said this prudently. "Don't worry, the emperor will agree. I have already thought about it. In order to express the goodwill of the mercenaries, I will lend Biming 520,000 taels of silver. You don't have to pay back a single cent for the first 5 years. Starting from the 6th year, you just have to pay it back in 5 years." Yang Chendong's face was full of confidence as he threw out another big bomb. It was said that money could make even the devil turn millstones. This move was the same even for the Emperor of Ming. As expected, when these words were said, Jean Ying's entire body trembled and her eyes lit up. Really? Yes. Yang Chendong nodded happily. Then he looked at Jean Ying and said, I have shown you my sincerity. I wonder what eunuch Jean will tell me. This meant that they were going to discuss conditions or even make a deal. Jean Ying only hesitated for a moment before immediately replying, Since Duke Zhongdan is so generous, this eunuch will meet with the emperor when I return. I will definitely give Duke Zhongdan an explanation on some matters. Ha 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 ha. The two of them seemed to laugh at the same time. They knew that no matter what would happen in the future, at the moment, they had already formed an alliance. Next, the two of them talked in the private room for more than 2 hours. It was only when the sky outside was about to turn dark that Jean Ying stood up and said goodbye. Today's meeting had been to exchange opinions on the general direction of some matters. Next, there would be a professional to discuss this matter. Then, it would be recorded. At that time, it would become a kind of rule that would be enforced. The Imperial Palace. Jean Ying had been gone for nearly 6 hours, and the sky was gradually darkening. The lanterns of the Imperial Palace had already been lit, but there was still no news. As the Emperor, Zhu Qiyu paced back and forth in the main hall, an anxious look on his face. His so-called composure had already vanished. Just what is this eunuch Jean trying to do? He couldn't have done anything to Jean Ying, right? Does he really dare to start a war with us in our capital? As countless thoughts ran through his mind, Zhu Qiyu's complexion grew more and more unsightly. The eunuchs serving him all stood far away, afraid that someone would say the wrong thing and incur the emperor's displeasure. Fortunately, there was finally some movement outside the hall. A eunuch hastily rushed into the hall and prostrated himself on the ground. Your Majesty, eunuch Jean has returned. Quickly bring him to see us. Upon hearing that Jean Ying had returned, Zhu Qiyu's expression relaxed. Although he didn't know why he had been gone for so long, there was one thing that he didn't need to worry about. There was no need for him to clash with Yang Chendong in the short term. In contrast to Zhu Qiyu's worry and anxiety, Yang Chendong was natural and unrestrained, steadily walking out of the immortal abode. He then sat down in a large carriage that could defend against arrows and spears, and under the protection of the 1st Black Cavalry, he made his way to the Hu estate. Chapter 803. Since he was going to his father-in-law's residence, he obviously couldn't bring his other wives with him. Qiaoyin and Lady Xiang were both arranged to stay in the immortal abode. Every night there would be a variety of performances, allowing the two women to enjoy themselves. As for himself, there were still many things he needed to do. Although there had been a murder case in the immortal abode, countless people had seen how courteous Jean Ying was when she left with the embroidered uniform guards. When they learned that the immortal abode was fine even after killing the embroidered uniform guards, the customers who came here felt even more relieved, and the number of customers increased. Tonight, the immortal abode was bound to be incomparably lively. Similarly, the Hu estate was also bustling. Hu Zhongning had already been taken away for 7 or 8 days. Apart from knowing that he was locked up in the imperial prison and hadn't been tortured yet, he didn't know anything else. His own son had been taken away by the embroidered uniform guards and imprisoned. As the father, Hu Xiao appeared calm and composed, but his heart was filled with anxiety. It had only been a few days, but the bustling Hu estate had suddenly calmed down. Not a single official came to pay their respects. This was the reality. Although it wasn't to the point where everyone would kick a man who was down, once the embroidered uniform guards came to an end, there would be many who would take the opportunity to deal with the Hu clan. Hu Xiao had been an official for many years and had seen all kinds of situations. He was still able to keep his composure. In contrast, his wife, Hu Wangshi, and daughter-in-law, Hu Yushi, who were also Hu Yan's mother and grandmother, couldn't keep their composure. They pestered him every day, asking him all sorts of questions, all about when Hu Zhongning would return. At first, Hu Xiao would respond with a few words, but as time went on, he stopped talking altogether. Instead, he instructed the housekeeper to keep an eye on his two wives, telling them to stay in their rooms and not to leave unless absolutely necessary. Although it was quiet now, this was only temporary. As long as Hu Zhongning wasn't released, the matter wasn't over yet. He could become the substitute emperor's target at any time, or even be the one to be executed. Hu Xiao had also thought of counterattacking, but when the embroidered uniformed guards appeared and attacked only the Hu clan, everyone else showed an attitude of self-preservation. This made it difficult for him to find an ally. It would be difficult to rely on himself to accomplish anything. This matter also allowed Hu Xiao to see more people's true colors. Although he had been in the government for decades, he had seen many such things. But when it was his turn, he still felt a chill in his heart. However, at that moment, he received news that the Duke of Loyalty had returned to Yang Village. In the past, when Yang Qindong returned, Hu Ming would only worry that his grandson-in-law was in danger. But now, all he had was hope. After all, he had already returned and could not be chased away. Perhaps his appearance could save his son. In Hu Zhao's expectation, Yang Qindong made his move on the second day after his return. One of the embroidered uniform guards had actually died in the immortal abode. The one who died was the adopted son of the head eunuch, Jin Ying, a Baihu. Coincidentally, that Baihu was the one who had taken Hu Zhongning away from the Hu estate a few days ago. After everything that had happened, Hu Chong couldn't help but feel hopeful. He had a feeling that this time, Yang Qindong was building momentum for the Hu clan and also looking for interest for the Hu clan. Didn't he have the ability to take away his father-in-law? Then he would do something even more ruthless. He would kill him directly in front of so many people. This method was a little extreme, but it was undeniably effective. With this experience, if anyone wanted to harm the Hu clan in the future, they would have to consider Yang Qindong's reaction. They would also have to touch their own necks to see if they were still there. Reporting. When the lanterns were lit and Hu Xiao was about to eat dinner, the steward suddenly reported that the Duke of Loyalty had come to pay a visit. The Duke of Loyalty? A hint of surprise flashed across Hu Zhao's face. Although he knew that after Yang Qindong returned to the capital as his grandson-in-law, he would have to pay a visit to the Hu estate, he hadn't expected it to be so soon. He waved his hand and said, "Please." There was no time to think too much. Hu Xiao got up and looked outside the door. Soon, Yang Qindong's tall figure appeared in his line of sight, and a group of black-armored soldiers appeared with him. Because of the iron armor covering their faces, no one could see their faces clearly, but the powerful, murderous aura emanating from their bodies could be felt from far away. This was definitely a group of veterans who had experienced hundreds of battles and killed countless people. Otherwise, they would never exude such a powerful, murderous aura. When they could see Hu Xiao from afar, Yang Qindong had Beta Persei, and the others stop. "All of you wait here." This was the Hu estate, the residence of the first madam, Hu Yan. Of course, he wouldn't let his subordinates scare the people here. After giving the order, he hurriedly took a few steps forward with a smile on his face and went straight to Hu Xiao, who was standing there. "Ha! This old man welcomes the Duke of Loyalty." Seeing that Yang Qindong was so sensible and hurried over to him, Hu Xiao revealed a long-lost smile on his face. From this point alone, it could be seen that the other party's attitude towards him was still very respectful. At least, it didn't change because of the change in his status. "Grandfather, you mustn't say that. It's really too much for Qindong." Since he had married Hu Yan, it meant that he had acknowledged everything about her. Now that he saw the first madam's grandfather, he naturally had to greet him as a junior. Haha, let's go inside and talk. When Hu Xiao heard how Yang Chendong addressed him, his face was filled with joy. He immediately stretched out his hand and pulled Yang Chendong's arm, laughing as they walked into the inner hall. Since Yang Chendong dared to appear in the Hu estate at this time, he must have known what had happened outside, and some of the troubles had even been resolved. This was Hu Xiao's confidence in Yang Chendong. If he hadn't done this, his grandson-in-law would never have rashly visited the Hu estate. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a visit, but a shift in the blame. When all the servants had left, leaving only Yang Chendong and Hu Xiao in the inner hall, the old man asked, "I heard that an embroidered uniform guard caused trouble in the immortal abode today, and they were even killed." Seeing Hu Xiao's questioning gaze, Yang Chendong nodded. There was indeed such a matter. In the end, eunuch Jining also came. The facts also proved that it was all a misunderstanding. With a smile, Yang Chendong recounted everything that had happened that afternoon to Hu Xiao. Yang Chendong still respected Hu Xiao from the bottom of his heart. This wasn't just because he was Hu Yan's grandfather. It was also because he was one of the leaders of the landowning clans, and because he was a true master of literature. Regardless of whether it was in his previous life or this one, Yang Chendong had always respected scholars. Wasn't the progress of society the result of these scholars' continuous efforts? In addition, Hu Xiao had been an official for so many years. He could be said to have lived in the same era as Yang Chendong's late father, Yang Rong. When it came to political wisdom, ordinary people couldn't compare to him. Perhaps he might be able to reap some benefits if he reported this matter to him. Hu Bazwa listened quietly, his expression changing from time to time. When he heard that Yang Chendong wanted to lend 5 million taels of silver to the southern Ming dynasty, as well as that he would use this place as a transit point to transport military supplies to the mercenaries in the grasslands, he was first surprised, then slowly nodded. This move seemed like an act of borrowing, but it was actually a declaration of sovereignty. He wanted to tell the Ming dynasty that the mercenaries had already established themselves in the grasslands. Once the Ming dynasty agreed to this request, it would be equivalent to them acknowledging the mercenaries' actions in the grasslands. Although it wasn't completely legal, it was at least reasonable. Both sides didn't say it clearly, but once the matter was approved, the corresponding results would naturally come out. From this point alone, Yang Chendong's 5 million taels of silver was well spent. At the very least, it showed that Yang Chendong's awareness of the overall situation was very strong. How big is this mercenary army now? After listening to Yang Chendong's explanation, Hu Xiao thought about it again and finally asked this question. In fact, it wasn't just him. Even the Ming dynasty, the emperor of the southern Ming dynasty, and the ministers were very concerned about this matter. It was just that the mercenaries' secrecy was too good, so outsiders had no way of knowing. However, there was a saying that everyone agreed on. That was, the mercenaries must have a huge base on the sea. Otherwise, how could these endless mercenaries be explained? How could they explain the firearms and excellent weapons in their hands? After asking this question, Hu Xiao stared at Yang Chendong. Facing such a gaze, Yang Chendong only chuckled and then answered, "If this question was asked by someone else, I naturally wouldn't answer. But if grandfather asked this question, I will directly answer it. Your seat is stable." This old man's seat is stable. Hu Xiao actually cooperated and said this sentence. Ha ha ha. Yang Chendong, who was laughing loudly, only said one sentence under Hu Xiao's serious expression. It's enough to destroy northern Ming. What? Even though Hu Xiao was mentally prepared, after hearing this answer, his body couldn't help but tremble. He thought that the mercenaries should be very strong. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent troops to the grasslands after taking down the two small countries, Jiaoji and Lancang. But at that time, whether it was Jiaoji or Lancang, or even the two vast regions of the southern Ming dynasty, they were all considered barren lands. There really weren't any good resources there for people to fight over. For such an unimportant place, if they took it, they would fight. It didn't mean that they had to pay a huge price or have a lot of strength. But now that he heard Yang Qindong's answer, Hu Shao knew that he was too careful and thought that the mercenaries were too weak. They actually had the strength to destroy the northern Ming dynasty. Didn't that mean that they were so powerful that no one dared to imagine it? Chapter 804. The shocked Hu Shao did not think that Yang Qindong would joke about such a thing, especially in such a private setting. If he really was bragging, there was no benefit in doing so. Could it be that he, as a grandfather, would flatter him? Since he could not, the correct answer was to tell the truth. Hu Zhao's face was filled with shock. All of this was within Yang Qindong's expectations. With the strength of the mercenaries, if they only chose Ming as their enemy, it would not be arrogant to say that they could take them down. It was just that due to various reasons and the conditions were not ripe, he would not do so. However, he still said such a thing to tell Hu Shao one thing, which was the true strength of the mercenaries. With this kind of support, he would not have to be so careful in the future. Of course, Yang Qindong had another thought. He had been away for a long time and could not return to the palace to accompany his wife, Hu Yan. However, if he could move her family over, she would be very happy. Taking this opportunity, he said tentatively, "Grandfather, I won't hide it from you. The mercenaries have a base on the sea. It is very rich, and the climate is pleasant. It is a good place to spend your old age. If grandfather agrees, I will immediately arrange for people to send your family there. In the future, you will not have to worry about any dangerous situations." As mentioned before, many people suspected that the mercenaries had a base on the sea. However, that was only a guess without any evidence. However, now that Yang Qindong had taken the initiative to admit it, and even invited him, Hu Shao was somewhat moved. This great Ming was not the same great Ming. Especially after the separation of the North and South, Hu Shao only felt that his days were not as good as before. The original strategy of ruling the world through literature was changing to ruling the country through military might. Whether it was Ming or Southern Ming, if they wanted to unify the country, they would inevitably have to fight a big battle. As such, the position of a civil official was not as important. At this time, if Hu Shao chose to leave, it would be the best time. At least he would not have to worry about the pain of war. It was just that this kind of feeling was nothing more than a passing thought in his mind, so that it would disappear. Although Hu Shao was almost 70 years old, his body was still very strong. In his own words, he could still work for a few more years. Now that he had agreed to Yang Qindong's request, it was not impossible. However, if he went there, he would only have one identity, Hu Yan's grandfather. If that was the case, it would not be the path he was pursuing. What he wanted was for others to see him in a different light. What he needed was to lay a good foundation for the Hu clan. He was keenly aware of Yang Qindong's great ambition. This person was only in his early 20s, but he had already found such a great foundation. His future could only be described as limitless. Then, as the first madam's maternal family, they should not only eat their fill, but also use this opportunity to do something. Perhaps in the future, the Hu family would have a bright future. All of a sudden, a path was laid out in front of him. Whether it was more vast or ordinary, everything depended on a single thought from him. Thus, Hu Shao quickly made a decision. He would work hard and fight for a better future for the Hu clan's descendants. After making a decision in his heart, Hu Shao looked at Yang Qindong and shook his head gently. Then he asked with a smile, "Duke of Loyalty, you don't think this old man is old, right? Let me tell you, I will work for a few more years. There is no problem at all. Besides, this place will become your army supply line in the future. You will need someone to help you keep an eye on this place." Hu Xiao rejected his suggestion and made the decision to work for the mercenaries. This made Yang Qindong a little surprised. He sighed in his heart that smart people were indeed smart people who knew how to maximize their own interests at the same time. He nodded. "Then I will leave it to you, grandfather." Hu Xiao's attitude suddenly changed. Speaking of which, this was not a one-time thing. Ever since the Tumu Rebellion, the great Ming dynasty was divided into North and South, and it became harder and harder to be an official. With the decline of the country and the rise of martial arts, Hu Xiao, as the Minister of Rights, lost his former glory. Thinking about how glorious the great Ming dynasty was in the past, there were many vassal states. As the Minister of Rights, he had to do countless things every year. But now, other than Korea, who would not send people to Ming, no other country would put them in their eyes. Not only that, but the situation in the country was not good either. In the past, private schools were everywhere, and there were as many scholars as there were hairs on a cow. But now, the entire country was in an environment of military preparations. Scholars were not as popular as before, and there were not many things for him to worry about as the Minister of Rights. He only had to provide some services for the royal family during festivals. After being the Minister of Rights for so many years, this was something that Hu Xiao had never experienced before. As such, he had long considered resigning. If not for the sake of his child, he didn't know where he should go after resigning. After all, the unrest in the world wasn't just limited to the northern Ming capital. The southern Ming capital wasn't faring well either. If he really did resign, he would probably go into seclusion. But now he finally had a new goal, or perhaps a direction to strive for. That was to help this grandson-in-law of his build a better foundation for the future Hu clan. As if suddenly thinking of something, Hu Xiao looked at Yang Qindong with bright eyes and asked, "When you spoke with Jining, did you talk about your coronation?" "No." Yang Qindong shook his head. In the past, when he was working for the Southern Ming Empire, he had mentioned that he wanted the throne. However, it had been delayed, so he didn't mention it anymore. In any case, it didn't matter to him whether he had the title of prince or not. The mercenaries wouldn't disobey his commands because of this reason. Seeing that Yang Qindong did not seem to care, Hu Xiao earnestly shook his head. No, a title is still very important. At the very least, in terms of righteousness, we cannot lose out. Understanding the meaning behind Hu Xiao's words, Yang Qindong thoughtfully thought for a moment before nodding. "Fine. Since that's the case, I'll bring it up again when I negotiate with them, but they probably won't agree." A king with a different surname was a taboo in the Great Ming dynasty. Besides the founding of the dynasty, no other king with the surname Zhu had been conferred. Of course, the Mu clan was an accident, but in the end, it was because they were too weak and their influence was limited to one area. So what if they were conferred a title? Yang Qindong was different. He was already very powerful, and if he was given a title, it would truly be difficult to control him. It's fine. Whether or not we can agree is one thing, but whether or not we want to is another. At the very least, we have to make our request known. Once the time is right, we will have the foundation and confidence to succeed, Hu Chang said with a thoughtful look on his face. Since he had decided to support this grandson-in-law, he would naturally tell them everything he knew. "Okay, I understand." Yang Qindong also nodded very seriously. Hu Xiao was right, whether the other party agreed or not, and whether he made a request or not were two different things. The only thing he needed to fight for now was to lay the foundation for him to obtain the throne openly in the future. While the grandfather and grandson were still chatting, the Hu estate's courtyard was already bustling with noise and excitement. Hu Zhongming had returned, and he had returned safe and sound. However, the Baihu behind him, Gao Sheng, was still somewhat weak. Compared to Hu Zhongming's status, Gao Sheng's Baihu was nothing. He had suffered a lot in the imperial prison, but he was still a man. He did not speak a word about the Hu clan, which allowed him to return with Hu Zhongming. When his mother, Hu Wangshi, and his wife, Hu Yushi, received the news, they were naturally filled with joy. Hu Xiao was much more reserved. Yang Qindong had just said that he had mentioned Hu Zhongming's matter during the negotiation with Jining. The other party had also agreed to release him quickly. Now, it seemed that their actions were quite nimble. Thinking about it, if they wanted to win Yang Qindong's financial support, if they were slow, it would only cause trouble for both sides. Hu Zhongming's return made the Hu clan very lively. At this time, Yang Qindong left the Hu estate and entered the large sedan. However, few people knew that as soon as he entered, Yang Qindong had already left the sedan on a deserted street. Under the cover of the night, he reported to Yang San, who was waiting at the corner of the street, and rushed straight to a heavily guarded military camp in the west of the city. Yang Qindong had gone in the middle of the night, and he had even concealed himself. Naturally, he was up to something big. In truth, the place he was heading to was an extremely secret place, the Great Ming's artillery camp. During the defense of the capital, Yang Qindong had used his authority at the time to befriend a few Ming generals. One of them was Yang Guang, the Great Ming general in charge of the artillery camp. After witnessing the power of the mercenaries' cannons, the Ming imperial court had invested a great deal of manpower and resources into researching firearms. After 2 years of hard work, they had finally succeeded in developing a new type of cannon. As the general directly in charge of the artillery camp, Yang Guang had naturally informed Yang Qindong of this news through a spy in the Security Bureau. This was also one of the main reasons he had returned to the capital of Ming, coming in the middle of the night, and in the middle of the day, when he had just killed the embroidered uniform guard and caused a storm in the city. No one had expected him to go through so much trouble. What Yang Qindong wanted to do was to attack everywhere with this thought in mind. Others would think that he would not obediently return to the Yang clan manor and wait for news from the emperor, but he would not. Doing the opposite was the safest way. At the corner of the street, Yang San had already prepared a Ming soldier's uniform that suited Yang Qindong's figure. Then Yang San accompanied Yang Qindong to the artillery camp. Chapter 805. Yang Guang, who had received the news early in the morning, was waiting outside the camp. When he saw Yang Qindong, he nodded without any change in his expression. Then, without even looking at Yang Qindong, he turned around and walked into the camp. Artillery General Yang Guang wanted to go back to the camp to check, so he only brought 2 bodyguards with him. Naturally, no one would be blind enough to come and check. Moreover, Yang Guang was very careful. When he knew that Yang Qindong was coming, he had already replaced the guards here with his own people. Naturally, no one would come to check. After entering the artillery camp, Yang Guang turned around and knelt in front of Yang Qindong. He lowered his head and said respectfully, "Yang Guang greets the 6th young master." "Get up." Yang Qindong reached out and helped him up. Then he looked at Yang Guang seriously and smiled. "Not bad. Your body is stronger than before." "Very good." "It's all thanks to the 6th young master." Yang Guang cupped his hands and said, "Sincerely." This was not a perfunctory remark, nor was it a polite remark. Ever since he became the general of the artillery camp, he had received too much care from Yang Qindong. Not to mention the silver that the Security Bureau gave him every month which was enough for him to live a better life, just with the care of the Minister of Justice, Su Yozhen, his position in the army soared. He no longer had to be careful in everything he did and look at other people's faces like before. It could be said that without Yang Qindong's care, he would not be where he was today. Since ancient times, there was a saying that if you take someone's money, you have to do things for them. At this moment, Yang Guang completely regarded himself as Yang Qindong's subordinate. Okay, we don't have to be so polite before. Bring me to see the cannons. Yang Qindong's time was tight. It was impossible for him to not show up for a long time. He was afraid that it would arouse suspicion. Yang Guang also knew that the Duke of Loyalty was busy with important matters and his time was precious. He nodded and led the way while pointing to the front and said, "There are a few new cannons there that haven't been stored yet. Duke of Loyalty can take a look." In fact, these cannons were supposed to be sent to the warehouse. If Yang Qindong hadn't told his superiors that he wanted to check them carefully for fear of any accidents, he wouldn't have been able to see these things. It was placed in a huge warehouse. Several pitch-black cannons were lying there quietly under red cloth. In the past, the great Ming dynasty had a cannon called the copper fire cannon. It was like a large gun barrel, and it was very difficult to move it. Moreover, not only was its power not great, but its shooting range was also very limited. It would only be effective if it was shot at a fixed target in advance. As for using it in battle, it was almost worthless. In view of the various shortcomings in the past, Zhu Qiyu, the emperor of the northern Ming dynasty, had put in a lot of effort this time. First, he gathered many blacksmiths. Among them, there was no lack of blacksmiths who were experienced in forging firearms. Everyone gathered together to brainstorm and improve the cannon according to the mercenaries' canon. This resulted in the current improved version, which could also be called the enhanced version of the advanced cannon. When the red cloth was lifted by Yang Guang, the biggest change to Yang Qindong was that the cannon had 2 more wheels. Although it still looked very heavy, at least it could be moved, increasing its flexibility to a certain extent. Duke of Loyalty, this cannon is called the Red Coat Cannon by Emperor Daizong. Its bowl diameter is 230 millimeters, its barrel diameter is 80 millimeters, its length is 150 centimeters, and it weighs about 50 kilograms. Compared to the previous copper fire cannon, which had a bowl diameter of 110 millimeters, a barrel diameter of 58 millimeters, a length of 5 centimeters, and a weight of 75 kilograms. It is more powerful, and its shooting range is more than twice as long. After listening to Yang Guang's introduction, Yang Qindong looked at the cannons. There was an opening at the front of the barrel that was larger than the barrel. The back of the barrel was a powder chamber, and there was an ignition hole for the fuse. Yang Qindong nodded. It looks much more impressive than the previous cannons. However, I wonder how far it can shoot and how lethal it is. Duke of Loyalty, we have tested this several times. The conclusion is that once the cannon is fired, its attack range can reach up to 450 meters, and its killing range can reach up to 3 meters. Attack range is still a shortcoming. Yang Qindong shook his head when he heard that the cannon could only hit less than 300 meters away. If someone else had said this, Yang Qindong would have retorted, saying that the other party was sour grapes. However, when the same words came out of Yang Qindong's mouth, it was completely different. Yang Guang had once followed Yang Qindong and was fortunate enough to see the mercenaries' cannon. He understood what Yang Qindong meant. That's right, Duke of Loyalty. However, to be able to hit a target at a distance of 450 meters is already very difficult. To be honest, Ming doesn't have much money. Even the 500 cannons used up their entire treasury. About an hour later, Yang Chendong and Yang Sen followed Yang Guang out of the artillery battalion with their disguises as bodyguards. This trip had given Yang Chendong a deeper understanding of the Baiming army's capabilities. To be honest, he was still somewhat shocked. It was also because of his appearance that the development of Baiming's cannons had improved significantly, according to Yang Guang. Other than the fact that the attack range wasn't satisfactory, the effectiveness of the cannons were many times better than before. If these cannons were used on the battlefield, the mercenaries would suffer greatly if they didn't know about it beforehand. After bidding farewell to Yang Guang, the two of them made their way to the Su clan in the capital. Since they were already out, Yang Chendong naturally had to do what he had to do. The carriage representing him should have already picked up the two madams and left the immortal abode for the Yang clan manor. That was tantamount to attracting everyone's attention. At this time, Yang Chendong's actions would remain a secret. "Young master, how about I bring a few more people with me? There's no need to alarm others. Our Bureau of Security has a team in Baiming. Although they aren't as strong as the guards, they're still quite skilled." When Yang San learned that Yang Chendong was going to visit Minister of Justice Su Yozhen's residence, and that it was a secret visit, he couldn't help but worry for his safety. "It's fine." Yang Chendong smiled and refused his kind intentions. Since they were going in secret, the fewer people who knew about it, the better. As for whether or not there would be any danger with just the two of them in the Su clan manor, even if Su Yozhen was given a few more guts, he still wouldn't have the guts. In the Su clan manor, it was already late at night, but as the master of the manor, Su Yozhen had no intention of going to sleep. Even though his new concubine had already sent people to urge him several times, he still remained indifferent. Through his own channels, Su Yozhen had already learned about what had happened in the immortal abode today. This was the main reason why he couldn't sleep peacefully. Speaking of which, Su Yozhen could be considered one of the first officials to pledge allegiance to Yang Chendong, and he'd also benefited the most. He'd been promoted from a mere 6th-rank official to the Minister of Justice, a 2nd-rank official. After Daizong removed the cabinet, the position of Minister of Justice was equivalent to that of a cabinet elder, and he was one of the highest-ranking officials. Logically speaking, after reaching his current position, there shouldn't be anything to be dissatisfied with. However, in reality, Su Yozhen's heart had always been in his throat. It had been a long time since he'd had a good night's sleep. The reason for all this was because Yang Chendong was too powerful. It had to be said that Su Yozhen's thirst for power and wealth was extremely great. In fact, he'd even resorted to some shady and unscrupulous methods to get to the top. However, all of this was for the sake of a better life. He'd never even considered rebelling. For example, when he'd first chosen to follow Yang Chendong, it was because he saw how generous this young master was and wanted to take advantage of him. He'd never imagined that not only was Yang Chendong generous, but his methods of handling matters, especially when it came to war, were so formidable that he'd become a threat to the existence of the great Ming dynasty. Su Yozhen had never thought that things would turn out this way. He just wanted to lean on a big tree to enjoy the shade. After all, if he wanted to be an official in the imperial court, he must learn to unite with others and stand in a group to attack another group. In layman's terms, it was a struggle between parties for authority. However, the big tree he was relying on was too powerful. It directly skipped this step and went straight to a new force. If it wasn't restrained, it wasn't impossible for it to become a new country one day. As a result, it was too dangerous for Su Yozhen to stand under this big tree. If he didn't want to be an official, he could resign and return to his hometown. However, if he relied on other forces and was found out, he'd definitely lose his head. Not only him, but even his family wouldn't be able to get any benefits. At that time, It was entirely possible for his entire family to be executed. With such a serious consequence pressing down on his head, he was afraid that no one would be able to sleep peacefully. Fortunately, Yang Qindong didn't appear in front of him often. As the saying goes, the mountain is high, and the emperor is far away. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't worry. When he didn't think about things, his mood would be better. However, now that Yang Qindong had returned to the capital of Ming, wouldn't their relationship be discovered at any time? For the sake of the overall situation, the Daizong emperor wouldn't do anything to Yang Qindong, but that didn't mean that he couldn't deal with him. Duke of Loyalty, how could you be so bold? You even killed the embroidered uniform guards and caused such a big commotion. Aren't you forcing the Daizong emperor to fall out with you? Imperial power can't be blasphemed. If that's the case, both sides will really fight. What should we do? Su Yozhen muttered to himself with an ashen expression. He didn't know the true strength of the mercenaries. Only habit told him that the Great Ming Dynasty was the Great Ming Dynasty. Not everyone could succeed in a rebellion. Over the years, hadn't countless facts already proven this point? Chapter 806. Once he thought about how Yang Qindong would be destroyed by Ming, he would not be able to gain any benefits, and would not be far from the destruction of his family. Su Yozhen sighed in his heart. He even considered whether he should take the initiative to confess to the emperor and tell the truth about his relationship with Yang Qindong. However, this was just a thought. When he thought about the serious consequences of doing so, he shook his head and gave up. He understood Zhu Qiyu. It was true that he wanted to do things, but he was not very broad-minded. Once he found out about his relationship with Yang Qindong, he would not even have the chance to explain before being beheaded. Thinking of the possible consequences, Su Yozhen couldn't eat or sleep. Just as he was feeling dejected and did not know what to do, light footsteps suddenly came from outside the inner courtyard. Su Yozhen was the dignified Minister of Justice and was in charge of Ming's law enforcement. His status was extremely noble, and he was the most important person in his residence. If he did not summon him, no one would be able to approach his small courtyard without permission. When he heard the sound, he could not help but raise his head to look. Then he asked with a cold expression, "Who is it, without my order, who allowed you to come here?" He was angry and had no place to vent it. It was as if he had suddenly found a good place to vent his anger. At the same time, a trace of ruthlessness flashed through his eyes. To be able to become the Minister of Justice, his temperament had long changed. It was not a joke to show his power without anger. If it was someone timid, they would have trembled from head to toe upon hearing this voice. However, this time, the person walking over acted as if he did not hear him. His footsteps were unusually steady, as if he had returned to his own home. There was actually someone in the residence who did not know when to stop. Su Yozhen's expression became even uglier. He even thought about whether or not he should call the head butler over and teach him a lesson. However, when the figure came closer and he could see clearly the reprimanding words that were about to come out of his mouth stopped. Perhaps it was because the anger he was holding was too unbearable, but it made him feel as if his face was flushed red. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, how could it be you? Why can't it be me? Your place is a tiger's den. Can anyone come in? Looking at Su Yozhen's surprised expression, Yang Qindong's expression was still very calm. Then he ignored Su Yozhen's surprise and walked into the house. He found a chair and sat down. Because Su Yozhen had something on her mind, she walked out of her room to get some fresh air. Now that she saw Yang Qindong return to his room, she felt cold all over. Thinking that it was winter now, she quickly trotted over. He didn't know that his current performance was no different from that of a lackey. Yang Qindong acted as if he had returned to his own home. He found a chair near the stove and sat down. Then he saw Su Yojin trotting over. Perhaps it was because his living conditions had improved. Compared to the last time they met, he had gained at least 5 kilograms. He was not thin to begin with, but now he looked even more plump. "Minister Su, look at your figure. You eat and drink well." "Ha, ha, it's all thanks to Duke of Loyalty and Courage." In this short period of time, Su Yojin had stabilized her mind. When she spoke, she was much more energetic. "Good, it's good that you know." Yang Chendong nodded, and then smiled as if he was joking. "I have been worried that Minister Su would be worried because you are too close to me in private. Now, it seems that there is no need to enlighten you." It seemed to be a joke, but Su Yojin was not stupid enough to take it as a joke. His thoughts were seen through. An awkward expression flashed across his face. Then he flattered, "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, you are really extraordinary. I heard that you killed the brocade guards. It was really good, really good." Jin Buchuan actually dared to have thoughts of harming the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. That Tong Lai actually dared to make a move against Hu Jun. There was more than one smart person. Obviously, Su Yojin also saw that Yang Chendong killed people today not only to establish his prestige, but also to settle old and new debts. Just based on this point, this person was worthy of being a minister. He really had some skills. Yang Chendong naturally did not have the intention to hide it from the other party. In fact, after knowing that Hu Kuan was under Jin Buchuan's orders, the Security Bureau told Su Yojin the news and asked him to cooperate to get some information about Jin Buchuan. He could be considered an insider. It was not surprising that he could say such words. Yang Chendong also nodded. "Come, have a seat. Tell me about your views on the current situation." Yang Chendong was never arrogant and did not think that the decisions he made were necessarily correct. What he needed to do was to listen to more people's opinions and then choose the most suitable path for himself. This time, other than coming to Su Yojin to remind him, he also wanted to listen to the views of this bystander on the current situation and use it as a reference. The Security Bureau had already reported that Su Yojin's recent performance was not very good. There were many things that he did not take the initiative to report to them, giving them the feeling of being thousands of miles away from them. When Yang Chendong reported the matter to him, Yang Chendong had already guessed Su Yojin's thoughts. After all, scholars were scholars, and their courage was still a bit too small. They dared to do things like fighting for power and profit, but when it involved rebellion and the lives of their entire family, they still retreated in the end. It was just that after receiving so many benefits and taking so much money from him, he wanted to withdraw now. How could there be such a cheap thing in the world? He was mainly here to remind the other party that there were some things that could not be turned back, such as political choices. Before getting down to business, Yang Chendong did not mind listening to his views on the current situation, so he sat down with a calm and composed look. Su Yojin was a smart person, even very smart. Yang Chendong suddenly came to visit at night, and he did not even greet him. Why was that? Wasn't it a sign that he did not believe him? Thinking that the other party was able to quietly appear here, presumably the servants in the residence must not have noticed. While he cursed them in his heart, he also became extremely careful. This was a person who could even kill the embroidered uniform guards if he wanted to, and he did it openly. If he angered the other party, it would not be too much trouble for him to kill him. While he was frightened, Su Yojin knew that he had to perform better to obtain Yang Chendong's attention and trust. At that moment, he was silent for a while. Then he began to speak quietly. The current emperor is a very thoughtful and ambitious person. As a descendant of the Zhu family, he wants to repeat the glory of his father's generation. Unifying the great Ming dynasty is one of the things that he wants to do, and then he wants to eliminate the external enemies and sweep the world. In order to achieve this goal, the Ming army imitated the mercenaries and greatly improved their weapons and equipment. Now, advanced firearms and even advanced cannons have been created. The 500,000 recruits have been trained, and the 500,000 newly recruited soldiers are also in the midst of training. If this continues, it will not be long before the conditions for war are met. At that time, not only the southern Ming dynasty and Walla, but even the mercenaries will be enemies in their eyes. As he spoke, he paid attention to the changes in Yang Qindong's expression. This was the reason why Su Yozhen wanted to retreat and get off the boat. Didn't the mercenaries rely on their advanced firearms to win against the Walla? Now that the Ming army has a large number of firearms and they have more people than the mercenaries, their advantage is obvious. If the two sides were to meet, who would win and who would lose would be a big question mark. If that was the case, where would Su Yozhen go? Yang Qindong naturally understood the situation. He was originally a little worried, but after going to the artillery battalion, his worries completely disappeared. Even if the cannons could only hit a distance of 500 meters, what did he have to fear even if they were stronger? Not to mention other things, with his large warehouse, he could completely destroy the artillery battalion in an instant. However, he would not say these words to Su Yozhen. Although this person had joined him long ago, it was only because of the situation. In his heart, this person was still biased towards the Ming dynasty. In his eyes, only the Zhu family was orthodox. Even if he was only a prince with the surname Zhu, perhaps he would still follow him. On the contrary, in the eyes of others, a power with a different surname would not have a good ending sooner or later. Su Yozhen was not the only one who thought this way. In fact, there were many people who thought this way. They all saw the Zhu family's descendants as orthodox. This was also another reason why Yang Qindong did not choose to start with the Ming dynasty. He did not want to spend a lot of effort to manage them after occupying a piece of land, or even prevent them from rebelling. On the contrary, small countries like Jiaoji and Lancang did not have a deep foundation. If they fell, then so be it. They would be able to be used very quickly. Speaking of which, Su Yozhen's words also indirectly expressed his attitude. That was, the Ming army had become stronger. This meant that sooner or later, the mercenaries would have to fight with them. Moreover, many people did not think highly of the mercenaries. This was the current situation in Ming. Su Yozhen was still sitting there talking. He talked about the changes in the army, the changes in the imperial court, and especially the changes in the Ministry of War. Recently, the generals had been making adjustments. It was unknown how many young men who had no background but were capable were promoted to the front lines. All of this proved that Zhu Qiyu valued the military very much and that he was determined to fight, as expected of someone who had been a cabinet minister in the future, and as expected of one of the most powerful ministers in history. Su Yozhen's analysis of the situation was clear and logical. The information that came out of his mouth was much richer and more vivid than the information obtained from the Security Bureau. Chapter 807. Su Yozhen spoke for quite a while. After drinking 2 cups of tea, she ended her speech with one sentence. I even have a suspicion that the southern Ming and northern Ming might even cooperate for the sake of the Zhu clan's empire. If they really do come to an agreement and work together to deal with foreign powers, then no power in the world would be a match for them. When he said this, Su Yozhen's attitude was firm, as if what he said was the truth. However, he didn't know that the world he was talking about and the world Yang Qindong was talking about were worlds apart. Putting everything else aside, what he saw was only the great Ming Empire. It also included the surrounding small countries, Korea, Japan, Mongolia, and other places. He couldn't imagine how big the world was outside of Asia, how many countries there were, and how strong or weak they were. But Yang Qindong knew, and his goal was grand. He didn't just want to conquer the great Ming dynasty, nor did he want to repeat the glory of the Mongols. He also wanted to achieve an even higher goal, and that was to unify the whole world and let all the Han people stand at the peak of the world. If he had to describe it in one sentence, it would be that as long as he could see the world, it would become the territory of the Han people, and it would be under the rule of the Han people. This was a great dream that no one in the past or in the future would be able to achieve. Even if Yang Qindong came from the future and had advanced technology, it would still be very difficult to achieve this goal. After all, this didn't only involve military affairs, but also religion, faith, culture, geography, and so on. However, Yang Qindong still did it without hesitation. With his current strength, he could be a rich man or even a carefree prince. He could occupy his own land, establish his own country, and unify his own territory, ensuring that he could live a good life. However, he didn't make such a choice. He thought about how the world treated the Han people in the future, and how the Han people couldn't obtain true fairness in many things. Since he came here, he had to think of a way to change everything. Perhaps thousands of years later, he wouldn't be here anymore, and his descendants wouldn't be able to live up to expectations. In the end, the world would change again. However, he wouldn't refuse to do what he should do, and he wouldn't stop doing it because of the law of development. There were always people who had to do things. If the Han people wanted to achieve these goals, who knew how many people they would have to kill in the end, and how many countries would have to be destroyed? But so what? Buddha said, if I don't go to hell, who will go to hell? If there was any punishment from the heavens, then it would be directed at him. As long as the Han people could live a better life and have a higher status, it would be worth it for him to sacrifice himself to help all the Han people. After Su Yozhen finished speaking, he talked about how powerful Bai Ming's military was now. Subconsciously, he was also advising Yang Qindong to stop. He even revealed his own thoughts in his words. If Yang Qindong was willing to stop his expansion and hand over all the mercenaries to the court, he would be willing to protect him and let him live a carefree life as a prince with a different surname. Chuckling, Yang Qindong looked at Su Yozhen with a cold gaze. As the saying goes, a person in Jianghu is like a boat going against the current. If you don't advance, you will fall back. The situation was already like this. So how could he possibly retreat? Even if he handed over his military power and obtained the identity of a prince who could guarantee that once the great Ming dynasty gained the upper hand, there wouldn't be a day when they would kill the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness? Would there be a day when they would casually find a reason to kill him? Yang Qindong didn't like the idea of putting his life in the hands of others. As the saying goes, one's life is up to oneself and not the heavens. Since he already had this ability, why should he put his hopes on others? Chuckling, Yang Qindong looked coldly at Su Yozhen. Minister Su, I already know what you said. I also appreciate your good intentions, but you are not me, so you can't make decisions for me. Similarly, I am not you, so I can't make decisions for you. But I can still give you a suggestion. Oh, loyal Duke, please say it clearly? Su Yozhen looked like he was all ears. Actually, it's not much of a suggestion. It's just the truth. After I leave, you can go into the palace to see Dai Zong. Tell him everything about your relationship with him, including how much you've received and what you've done for him. You can tell him everything. You can even tell him that Bai Ming won't allow other forces to exist. Loyal Duke also won't allow other forces, including Bai Ming, to exist. The best way to solve this problem is to take advantage of the fact that my army is outside and people are in Yangjia village to immediately attack me. This is the best way to solve this problem once and for all." There was a smile on his face, but every time he said a sentence, Su Yozhen's body couldn't help but tremble. How was this a suggestion? It was clearly a threat. Su Yozhen had done a lot of research on Dai Zong. If you really had a problem with government affairs, he could forgive you. If you were just greedy and had a good performance, he would only remind you. He wouldn't really do anything to you. After all, the great Ming dynasty didn't kill imperial censors and didn't punish scholars. The ancestral law still had some effect. However, if you dared to live off one person and betray another, then it was absolutely intolerable. The previous Minister of Justice, Yu Shuriwei, was someone that Dai Zong had personally favored and promoted. In terms of closeness, he was much stronger than him. But in the end, what happened? Was it because Yu Shuriwei was found to have private contact with southern Minging Zone and was immediately executed? Yu Shuriwei said that Kill had been killed, so why should Su Yozhen be fine? Did he really think that everything would be fine if he took the initiative to admit his mistake? Too naive. Su Yozhen, who was already covered in cold sweat, was no longer as confident as when he analyzed the situation of the world. He continuously wiped the sweat with his sleeve and looked at Yang Qindong. He forced a smile and said, "Loyal Duke, I'm joking." "Humph, this is indeed a joke. I also hope that you won't give me the chance. Otherwise, I don't know if I'll be fine, but you will be the first to die. If that day comes, even if Dai Zong wants a good reputation and let your family go, I won't let them go. Don't blame me for being ruthless. Being merciful to one's opponent is being cruel to oneself. I will definitely not do such a stupid thing like letting a tiger return to the mountain. That's all I have to say. You should think carefully about what to do in the future and what to do." After saying this, Yang Qindong stood up. He didn't look at Su Yozhen and didn't listen to any of his explanations. He turned around and walked out of the room. At this moment, he needed to give Su Yozhen time to think carefully. In a hurry, even if the other party made a choice, it might not be sincere. Yang Qindong had already left. Su Yozhen felt his body go soft and leaned against the chair and collapsed into a ball. No matter how regretful he was now, and no matter how much he didn't think highly of Yang Qindong, he had no choice now. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he had already boarded Yang Qindong's ship. Now, even if he wanted to get off, he had to. He seemed to have no other choice. It had been 7 or 8 days since Yang Qindong returned to the capital of Baiming. Seeing that the new year was coming in 3 days, the atmosphere of the entire Yang family manor became lively. Ever since he entered the capital on the 2nd day, Yang Qindong had been holed up in the manor and hadn't gone out. Firstly, he didn't want to add any pressure to the guards around him. Secondly, he didn't want to excessively provoke the Baiming court. Jining had already sent someone to pass on the message. Dai Zong had agreed to most of the requests that they had discussed, but there were some specific details that still needed to be discussed. From today onwards, Jining would personally come to the Yang family manor to talk and make the final decision on some matters. Beta Persei, I'll leave this matter to you. In the morning, Yang Qindong practiced martial arts and ran 5 kilometers with the guards. When he returned to the courtyard, he said this to Beta Persei. "Me." Beta Persei pointed at himself in disbelief. "Yes, it's you. I think it's good that you're dealing with Jining. Of course, I'll arrange 3 assistants for you. Yang San, Wang Si, and Sherbei will follow you. You just need to be in the formation and watch the 3 of them perform. When the discussion is over, you'll be in charge of the final decision." Yang Qindong said this very solemnly. He didn't seem to be joking at all. Yang Qindong didn't have a good impression of eunuchs. He was even more repulsed by this kind of debating with them. If it weren't for the fact that the time was far from ripe, he probably wouldn't have even bothered to talk, and would have directly mobilized his troops to fight. Since he couldn't fight, he would leave the negotiation to his subordinates. There was also an advantage to leaving it to Beta Persei. If something fell through, he could step in at the end to remedy the situation. After Yang Chendong said this, Beta Persei knew that the matter had been decided and couldn't be changed. He nodded and said, "All right, Beta Persei will obey the young master's orders." "Haha, very good." He reached out and patted Beta Persei's shoulder. "All right, you go and discuss with Yang San and the others. I'll go to the academy to take a look at the young master." Yang Chendong didn't bring any guards. This was a sign of his confidence in the safety of the Yang clan. He strode to the outside of the academy. Along the way, many people would salute him from afar when they saw him, expressing the most sincere respect in their hearts. Chapter 808. In the past few days, Yang Chendong came to the academy most often, except for the bed of the two madams in the inner courtyard of the manor. In line with the political policy of putting people first and needing talents for development, he even gave a few lectures to the students of the academy. The contents of the lectures were not from the textbooks, but they were very practical and involved some profound issues such as local management and human rights, which attracted the reflection and discussion of the students of the academy. According to the second Dean Wang Si, the discussion was very enthusiastic, and the results were obviously good. The new year was coming soon, and the negotiations were about to begin. Everything was developing in an orderly manner as expected. Yang Chendong was in a good mood, humming some tunes of the later generations as he came to the gate of the academy. Coincidentally, he bumped into Junko, who was dressed in Han Chinese clothing, but it still set off her slim figure. Junko was at the age of 18 or 19, which was the most beautiful time of her life. Suddenly, she saw Yang Chendong here, and the other party was alone. This scene and this sudden encounter made her stunned in place, and then quickly lowered her head. Yang Chendong was also a little surprised by this unexpected encounter. But since they met, it was not good to not say anything, so Yang Chendong tried to pretend to be normal and said, "It's Junko. How are you? How are your studies here? You should be used to life here." 2 years ago, the two of them were still in contact with each other. At that time, the relationship between the two of them was much warmer than it was now. There was even a time when the two of them almost had a spark of love. But with the passage of time, her feelings for Yang Chendong slowly decreased. At this moment, Junko didn't know how to face Yang Chendong. She didn't even know what to say to him. Seeing Junko standing there for a long time without speaking, Yang Chendong's expression was slightly embarrassed. And then he said, "Oh, you still have things to do, then you can do it." After saying this, Yang Chendong was about to walk past Junko. But just as he took a step, Junko, who was lowering her head, suddenly said, "What? You don't want to see me? You're not even willing to spend some time alone with me?" Yang Chendong looked aggrieved. "I was talking to you, and I even acted like I cared about you, but you didn't answer me at all." Of course, such words could only be suppressed in his heart. Yang Chendong wasn't that stupid to reason with a woman. He chuckled, looking very calm. "How could that be? After all, we're old friends." "Oh, right. Do you have any plans for the future?" "After the new year, I will take the people in the manor and leave for the grasslands. If you are willing, you can come with me. Of course, if you miss your royal father, I will arrange for someone to send you to your own country after we reach the grasslands." How should he treat Junko? This was a problem that the two ladies often talked about with him these days. Junko was young and beautiful. She grew up in the palace. She had a noble and elegant temperament, the kind that men couldn't help but like. Yang Chendong was a man, a very normal man and a healthy man. If he said that he didn't have any thoughts about her, he wouldn't believe it. But when he thought that one of his goals in the future was to destroy the Japanese army and rebuild it, he had to suppress his thoughts about Junko. Not only did he want to marry her, but he also wanted to destroy her country, especially the country that belonged to her royal father. No matter how he looked at it, it was so unreasonable. Yang Qindong was a person who cared about his face. He couldn't do such a thing. After thinking about it, Yang Qindong made the decision to let go of Junko. Of course, this decision was made by himself. If Junko didn't want to leave him and insisted on following him, then he would stop while he was ahead. The choice he was making was a test for him. Yang Qindong actually said that he would let her go. This was what Junko had been thinking, but she didn't know why. Now, after hearing this sentence, she was not happy at all. There was a faint sense of loss in her heart. That, I will give you an answer after thinking about it. Okay? Anyway, no matter what, I will go to the grassland with you, right? Junko didn't make a decision right away. Instead, she decided to use this time to think about it. She had to admit that Yang Qindong's shadow had long been in her heart. If she was just an ordinary Japanese woman, she was afraid that she would have already found a way to throw herself into the arms of this man who gave her the feeling that he was omnipotent and had the most solid arm. But she was not. She was the daughter of the Emperor of Japan. She was destined to dedicate her life to the country and her family. This mission was instilled in her heart since she was a child. It was not something that could be changed in 2 years. Yang Qindong didn't expect her to answer right away. This was something that would decide her life. So he nodded painfully. Okay, after you reach the grassland, you can come to me after you have made your decision. No matter what decision you make, I will understand and support it. Thank you, Junko said gratefully when she heard Yang Qindong understand her so well. You're welcome. Yang Qindong, who answered with a smile, suddenly remembered that the negotiation with Jining was still lacking a recorder. He remembered that Junko's Chinese was not only good, but her handwriting was also very beautiful. So he had another idea. By the way, the negotiation between the Ming Imperial Court and us will begin soon. If you are interested, you can be a recorder. Recorder? Junko raised her head and looked at Yang Qindong with those big eyes that seemed to be able to speak. Yes, a recorder. You will record what both sides have said, as well as the final result of the negotiation. It is actually a bit difficult. If you are not willing to go, I will arrange for someone else to do it. Yang Qindong didn't know what Junko meant, so he didn't say anything. No, I am willing to go. To Yang Qindong's surprise, Junko actually nodded excitedly. As the emperor's daughter, she seemed to be very interested in politics since she was young. Now that she was lucky enough to witness the negotiation between Ming and the mercenaries, she naturally wouldn't reject such a good thing. Okay, then you should prepare well. Yang Qindong nodded. He also had his own plans in mind. He wanted Junko to understand more about the situation on his side. Perhaps after a comparison, she would discover how weak the Japanese Empire was and directly throw herself into his arms. After this meeting, Jining quickly brought a group of people to the Yang village. A large house was specially arranged in the outer courtyard. The fire inside was very strong, and it became the place for both sides to negotiate. Beta Persei appeared as the main negotiator. Along with him were the chief of security, Yang San, the second dean of the Yang Academy, Wang Si, Yang Qindong's personally appointed advisor, Shib, and the recorder, Princess Junko. Jining didn't show any displeasure towards Yang Qindong not personally participating in this negotiation. On the contrary, he was somewhat happy. After all, Yang Qindong gave him too much pressure. Anyone who faced such a strong opponent would bear a heavy psychological pressure. Under such a mentality, it was very difficult to negotiate a favorable outcome. Yang Er, on the other hand, was different. He would not give himself any pressure. This way, when they were talking, he would be able to express his own demands better and even raise some excessive conditions. Both sides sat together with their own thoughts and began to negotiate some related matters. 15 li away, in the capital of Ming, in an extremely ordinary courtyard, several people were gathered to discuss a heaven-shaking matter. It wasn't an exaggeration to call it a major matter, because the ultimate goal of this matter was to kill the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong. When Yang Qindong arrived in the capital of Ming, the ones who were nervous were naturally the Ming faction. First, they had to make a choice between attacking or not attacking, and once they chose to cooperate, no one would harbor any evil intentions toward the Duke of Loyalty. But just because Ming didn't have such thoughts didn't mean that others didn't, like the Southern Ming Empire. The people in this room were assassins sent by the Southern Ming Empire. They had made the decision to assassinate Yang Qindong with the dual goal of striking down the mercenaries and Ming. And once their goal was achieved, it was easy to imagine what kind of chaos it would cause. At that time, both sides would fight to the death, and no matter who won or lost, the Southern Ming Empire would be able to reap the benefits. When the Southern Ming Emperor, Zhu Qizhen, made this decision, he gave the task to his most trusted aide, Chao Jixiang. Then his nephew, Chao Xian, rushed all the way from Nanjing to Beijing and began to make various preparations for the assassination. In the room, the one sitting at the head was Chao Xian. He had arrived in the capital of Ming last night, and he was naturally very familiar with this place where he had stayed for decades. He quickly contacted the Southern Ming Empire's embroidered uniform guards, and today's meeting was held. In order to prevent the news from being leaked, these embroidered uniform guards who took orders from the Southern Ming Empire didn't know what their mission was. They only knew that they were going to kill someone. Chao Xian's gaze was gloomy and cold. He first looked around at his subordinates before saying, "His Majesty Ingzong values this mission greatly. Once it's completed, I can guarantee that all of you will enjoy glory, splendor, and wealth in the future. You only need to complete this task, and you can return to the Southern Ming Empire as meritorious subjects. And for the sake of Donning's goal, I need all of you to mobilize your most elite forces and wait for my orders." You understand? Understood. Even though they didn't know who they were going to kill, they didn't need to think too much about the huge benefits. At this moment, they were blinded by the benefits of succeeding and had lost their rationality. Chapter 809. Chao Xian first arranged for his subordinates to gather elites, and then he disguised himself and made a trip to the Dong residence in the city. Although it was called a residence, it was just a slightly larger courtyard. The owner, Dong Bao, was the general of Ming's Yongding Gate, but he was only a trifling sixth-rank military official. And this was only because Daizong had recently increased the treatment of generals. Otherwise, with his salary alone, it would have taken him countless years to buy a courtyard like this in the capital, where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. The general of the Yongding Gate was just one of Dong Bao's official identities. He had another identity, a hidden chess piece that Daizong had left in Ming's capital. It was only because of his low rank and the fact that there were no missions for him to do that he was able to hide himself very well. But even if he was a hidden chess piece, it would be impossible for him to live a peaceful life. With Chao Xian's arrival, his life was destined to undergo a major change. The 29th day of the 12th lunar month, the third day of negotiations. Overall, the progress was pretty good. Perhaps both sides wanted to negotiate, but they were both wary of the other. Thus, many major issues had already been settled, but there were still some minor issues that required both sides to make some concessions. These matters were left to Beta Persei and the others. Yang Chendong only needed to listen to the reports after the negotiations and look at Junko's records. As a result, he was quite content, and he was able to spend more time with his 2 wives every day. However, life seemed to be filled with all kinds of accidents. Whenever a problem appeared, another problem would involuntarily pop up. It had only been a few days when the Yang Manor's housekeeper, Yang Nung, appeared outside the inner courtyard, saying that he wanted to see the 6th young master. Yang Nung was the eldest son of the Yang clan's steward, Yang Hai. Yang Hai had followed Yang Rong for many years, so there was no need to doubt his loyalty. Yang Nung had inherited his father's character, and after becoming the steward of the Yang clan manor, he had performed well and was now in charge of the immortal abode. Yang Chendong was somewhat taken aback by this sudden request, but in the end, he still went to see him. Only then did he learn that the immortal abode had suffered from mass food poisoning. There were 4 tables full of 20 customers who had eaten something bad, and they refused to leave the immortal abode. Today was the 29th day of the new year. The closer it was to the end of the year, the better the business of the hotel became. Those who had money in their pockets would call their friends. When they gathered together, it was inevitable that they would eat and drink. The immortal abode, which had the best taste, the best environment, and the best way to show off one's status, became the place where everyone fought to be the first to gather. Compared to normal times, business in the immortal abode was exceptionally good before and after the new year. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was hard to find a place. Even the best locations had to be reserved a few days in advance. But in such a lively time, the sudden appearance of poisoning, one could imagine how big of a commotion it would cause. However, a mere poisoning incident wasn't enough for Yang Nung to rush back to the Yang family manor to see him. In such a large restaurant, once such a special incident occurred, they must have already taken measures to deal with it. Thus, Yang Chendong looked at the nervous Yang Nung and asked, "Speak. Is there some important figure among the poisoned customers?" As soon as Yang Chendong said this, Yang Ning's eyes revealed a very surprised expression. 6th young master is indeed formidable. Indeed, one of the 20 poisoned customers is the current imperial censor of the right Dong Chunhua. Because such a person is involved, we do not dare to act rashly. How could we possibly invite the 6th young master over? Yang Chendong chuckled, an expression that said, as expected, this Dong Chunhua could be considered an old acquaintance. He had once wanted to show off in front of Wang Chong and trample on Wang Chong's face, but in the end, he had naturally suffered a loss. Among the current second-rank officials, Yang Chendong and Yu Shirue naturally didn't get along, so Yang Chendong had gotten rid of him. The remaining second-rank official was Dong Chunhua, who had been the left deputy imperial censor at that time. Wang Chong didn't expect to meet them again, and the other party had even been promoted from deputy to official. But this time, it was obvious that the other party's luck wasn't good, and Wang Chong was in the wrong. I understand. Since that's the case, this young master will personally make a trip. Since it involved a second-rank official, even if it was for the sake of face, it wouldn't be easy for an ordinary person to handle it. If Yang Chendong wasn't in the capital, it would be fine. But since he was, if he didn't make an appearance, it would be inevitable for others to say that he was arrogant. It was best not to leave such a domineering impression. Yang Nung was naturally overjoyed that the 6th young master was going to personally make a move. He immediately went to arrange a carriage. Considering that Beta Persei was still negotiating with Jining, Yang Chendong didn't want to disturb him. Instead, he called for Yang Si and 50 members of the 1st Guard Squad to leave the Yang clan manor. They were still negotiating with Ming, and Yang Chendong didn't think that anyone would try to target him at this time. Besides, Even if it was an ordinary threat, the first guard squad should be able to deal with it. In the immortal abode, the initial excitement had already died down. The incident had happened too suddenly. At the start, the 4 tables of customers were all pale and powerless, truly frightening the other customers. But when the immortal abode's resident physician came out and examined the dishes, it was determined that they had been poisoned with laxatives, not the quality of the food. This sort of thing really had happened in the past. Some people in the same industry saw that the immortal abode's business was doing so well, so they found people to poison the food in an attempt to ruin its reputation. It could be said that only people in the same industry had undisguised hatred. When this incident first happened, it caused quite a bit of chaos. But the immortal abode immediately took decisive measures. Not only did they find the best physicians to treat their customers, they also paid a considerable sum of money. When the customers didn't pursue the matter, the others naturally couldn't say anything. Not to mention, this sort of thing could happen in other restaurants as well. It wasn't strange anymore. It was just that the 4 tables of customers had some problems, and the immortal abode's steward had immediately stepped out to show his sincerity. Today, all of the customers had a 20% discount on their meals. This quickly calmed everyone down, and everything returned to normal. Only the 4 tables of customers still had unsightly expressions because of their stomachs. Normally, the steward would have already apologized and paid 200 taels of silver to each person, and the matter should have been resolved. Unfortunately, the imperial censor of the right, Dong Chunhua, was among the 20 people. He didn't accept the money, nor did he have any intention of leaving. As such, the others could only sit there and accompany him. Dong Chunhua's luck really wasn't too good. The officials below him insisted on treating him to a meal when it was the new year. He couldn't refuse them, so he came. He never would have thought that something like this would happen. He was a second-rank official, yet he had to fight over a toilet with a commoner because of his stomachs. If word got out, it was truly embarrassing. After taking the anti-diarrheal medicine prescribed by the physician, Dong Chunhua's condition improved a bit, and he began to think of a plan. He could be considered one of Dai Zong's trusted aides, and he'd been looking for faults with the Duke of Loyalty and Courage this entire time. Since this kind of thing had happened to him, if he didn't take advantage of it, wouldn't he be letting down all the suffering he'd suffered just now? As such, he had no intention of leaving. He sat there, waiting for Yang Chendong to appear. Then, he'd have a good talk with him. Even if he could only use this opportunity to make the other party admit defeat, that would still be a very impressive thing to do. Dong Chunhua didn't have to wait for too long. An extremely luxurious carriage arrived at the entrance of the immortal abode. Then, several dozen black-clad guards appeared on both sides. Just from this lineup, everyone knew that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had arrived. It had to be said that Yang Chendong was very famous in Baiming's capital. He was different from the other dukes, marquises, and counts. These people only had status, but they didn't have any real power. When outside, it was best to keep a low profile as much as possible. Otherwise, the imperial censors weren't just for show. They'd report you at any time. Compared to them, Yang Chendong's lineup was much larger. No matter where he went, he would instantly become the center of attention. In this regard, the imperial censors couldn't do anything about it. There was nothing they could do about it. He was the leader of an army. Who knew how many people he'd killed on the battlefield? Who knew how many people he'd offended because of this? It was only natural that he had strict security measures. Of course, the most important reason was that the soldiers he was leading weren't from the great Ming. Moreover, Yang Chendong himself had never received any salary from Baiming. Even if these imperial censors wanted to report him, they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. When they saw that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had arrived, A few of the diners looked toward the entrance with eager eyes. In truth, when the incident happened, there were some people who weren't afraid of the consequences and waited here. In fact, even after they finished eating, they had no choice but to call a few more people over. They wanted to see how the Duke of Loyalty and Courage would deal with Sir Dong. The carriage stopped, and a green-robed Yang Qindong stepped out. He was still dressed the same as before. If there was any change, it would be that he looked more mature. After getting out of the carriage, Yang Nun led him to a table on the left side of the first floor. In ancient times, the left side was the most respected. In the immortal abode, apart from the second and third floors, the left side of the first floor was the best location. Yang Qindong attracted everyone's attention as soon as he appeared. They wanted to see if the Duke of Loyalty and Courage would lower his head and admit his mistakes. Even if it was just a bow, to Dong Chunhua, it would be a victory that he could be proud of for a long time. Dong Chunhua, who was originally sitting there calmly, didn't know why, but when he heard footsteps outside and saw the diners suddenly stop and look outside, he began to feel inexplicably nervous. When Yang Qindong's figure completely appeared in front of him, he suddenly stood up. If it weren't for the fact that his face was still pale and bloodless, it would be hard to believe that he had already lost half his life from vomiting and diarrhea. Chapter 8:10. All of this was because Yang Qindong's reputation was too great. The last time they'd met, he hadn't been able to gain the slightest bit of advantage, which had left a shadow in his heart. As soon as he saw Yang Qindong, he instinctively stood up. As soon as he stood up, he happened to meet Yang Qindong's gaze. Then, under the collective gazes of everyone present, an unexpected scene occurred. Yang Qindong, who just entered the main hall, couldn't stop himself from bursting into laughter. Ha! Ha! It seems like you've suffered quite a bit. My apologies. I couldn't control myself. I was just expressing my feelings, that's all. Not only did Yang Qindong not have the slightest intention of apologizing, he even had a mocking look on his face. Instantly, the other diners all fell silent. Then, when they came back to their senses, they also began to laugh loudly. This laughter caused Dong Chunhua's face to turn red. He'd been waiting for the other party to teach him a lesson. Who would have thought that when the other party came, he'd be the first to stand up in fright? Then, he'd be ridiculed instead. If news of this spread, he'd probably become a laughingstock. The originally tense atmosphere was completely dispelled by this laughter. Dong Chunhua knew that there was no point in keeping a straight face, so he could only face it head-on. With a serious expression, he asked, "Duke Zhongdan, the immortal abode is your business. Now that a guest has been poisoned by a laxative while eating here, how do you explain this?" Yang Qindong's expression also suddenly became much more serious. He angrily said, "I express my extreme indignation and anger towards the despicable people who use such underhanded means to harm my immortal abode's business. I strongly condemn them. If I discover anyone else doing this in the immortal abode, I will definitely hand them over to the authorities and give them a heavy punishment. As for the guests who have been harmed, our immortal abode will also compensate them appropriately. We will compensate them as much as we can to express our apologies. Sir Dong, I presume that the stewards of the immortal abode have already given each of your guests 200 taels of silver. Don't tell me you didn't receive it?" The words he'd said earlier were all righteous words, but if one thought about it carefully, they were all just diplomatic words. This was also a common tactic used by various countries in the future. Towards the end, it was as if they were trying to make a big issue small and a small issue into nothing. However, if one person had to pay 200 taels, 20 people would pay 4,000 taels of silver. This wasn't a small amount. Seeing Yang Qindong ask if he had received the silver, Dong Chunhua wanted to say no, but others had received it. Why didn't he? He couldn't say that he didn't want to take it, let alone that he thought the silver was too little. To pay. Of them to say to pay. To pay. To pay 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 to pay. Pay. To pay to compensate, to pay to pay to pay to pay to to pay to pay to pay to pay to pay to pay to's to pay. Of the of. To pay a. In other words, the immortal abode's methods were already very fair, leaving the others speechless. When Dong Chunhua saw that the others didn't say anything after receiving the money, he knew that he was alone. Yang Chendong hadn't shown any signs of weakness. He couldn't beat the other party in words, nor could he beat the other party in a physical fight. Staying here would only increase his troubles. Dong Chunhua snorted coldly, then walked out of the immortal abode with his hands clasped behind his back. Only the immortal abode would be able to bully their customers. Only they would be able to make a second-rank official speechless and have nothing to say. Seeing Dong Chunhua leave just like that, without even leaving behind a single vicious word, Yang Chendong felt as if he hadn't heard a thing. Men, bring that person who paid 200 taels of silver to Sir Dong's residence. No matter what, we can't let him suffer for nothing. Yang Chendong's words seemed to have good intentions, which immediately drew a round of laughter from the other customers. The farce seemed to have ended just like that, but Yang Chendong didn't think that was the case. He called Yang Nung over and asked him what exactly had happened and whether he'd already investigated the matter. Since he was going to invite the sixth young master over, he naturally had to get to the bottom of the matter. Yang Nung immediately gave him a report of what he'd just learned. Sixth young master, this is how restaurants are. The competition is too fierce. Sometimes when you can't win in a direct confrontation, you can't help but think of using other methods. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. Fortunately, everyone has some misgivings. Even if they use drugs, they won't use too much force. In any case, it won't harm anyone's life. However, we've still been very careful. When we're cooking and serving the dishes, we have people serving them. I've already asked them, and they're all old hands. They wouldn't do something like taking someone else's money to trample on their own business. It's a bit strange that we don't have any leads at all. The restaurant industry actually had such methods of competition. This was a bit beyond Yang Chendong's expectations. Of course, he didn't know much about the restaurant industry in his past life, so it was only natural that he wouldn't be able to see through it. However, it was a bit strange that he couldn't find the culprit. All right, we have to be more careful in the future. Who cares what other people do? In any case, our immortal abode can't participate in this kind of thing. If we want to attract customers, we have to put more effort into the taste of the dishes, the quality of the service, and the atmosphere. If we use such underhanded methods too often, we'll be struck by lightning. When Yang Chendong saw Yang Neng's anxious and self-reproachful appearance, he reached out and patted him on the shoulder. He had served the Yang clan for generations, and had even changed his surname to Yang. Such a loyal person should be encouraged, not discouraged. Yang Chendong nodded emotionally when he sensed Yang Chendong's concern for him. His eyes even reddened as he said, "That's right. We'll remember the sixth young master's words. In the future, we'll continue to improve ourselves. We won't use any underhanded methods." This was just a small matter. If not for the fact that this matter involved a second-rank official, Yang Chendong wouldn't have asked about it. Yang Neng also wouldn't have bothered him over such a small matter. Now that Dong Chunhua had taken the initiative to leave, the matter could be considered to have come to an end. It was just a case of diarrhea. They discovered it in time and given sufficient compensation, so the matter was quickly resolved. Yang Chendong returned to his carriage and headed for the outskirts of the capital, Yongding Gate. This was one of the 12 outskirts of the capital of Ming, and it was also the road that Yang Qindong had to pass through to reach the Yang clan manor. He had already walked this road countless times, especially when Yang Qindong had first arrived at the capital of Ming. Because his elder sister and brother were living in the city, he would make this trip every few days. It was just that after Yang Qindong returned, his brothers and sisters all sent people to the Yang family manor to take the initiative to meet him. It was likely that they also knew that their little brother's status was different. It was somewhat difficult for him to see them, and it was also a test of safety. This saved Yang Qindong the trouble of running around. He had already met with the people he needed to meet in the capital. If there really was something, they would naturally take the initiative to look for him at the Yang clan manor. With nothing else to do in the capital, Yang Qindong returned home. Under the protection of the first guard, he left the inner city and headed straight for the Yongding Gate. It was almost the new year, and the streets were bustling with people. There was an endless stream of peddlers, and the common people seemed to be spending more than half of their annual income in these few days. This made the city seem extremely lively, and there was already a festive atmosphere to it. Yang Qindong sat alone in his luxurious carriage, a sincere smile on his face as he listened to the hubbub of people outside. The common people lived and worked in peace and contentment. Wasn't this what all those who worried about the country and its people wanted to see? This was also the true reason Yang Qindong wanted to carry out a peaceful evolution. If possible, he naturally hoped to use the method of boiling a frog in warm water to influence and infiltrate the great Ming dynasty. In the end, they would become part of the new country without any signs of life. Nothing could be better than this. But now, it seemed that this was just a thought. Based on what Su Yozhen, Hu Shao, and Yang Guang had said, Ming had trained so many new soldiers and built so many firearms. It was clearly impossible for them not to fight a battle. Perhaps they were feeling too full of themselves, believing that they were the strongest army in the world and could properly wrestle with the mercenaries. When facing such a person, if one didn't beat them into submission, it would be impossible to convince them with words alone. When he thought of this matter, Yang Qindong couldn't help but think of Su Yozhen, who wanted to get off the ship. Previously, the Bureau of Security had noticed that this minister's attitude wasn't as proactive as before. There were even many things that he wouldn't say if one didn't ask. This hidden chess piece was already on the verge of going out of control. Fortunately, after that night's meeting, Yang Qindong's warning had an effect. It made Su Yozhen sober up and realize that there were some things that he couldn't do even if he didn't want to do them. There were some choices that had been made, and there was no way to regret it. Since that night, Su Yozhen had taken the initiative to contact the Bureau of Security as before. This was a typical example of someone who was asking for a beating. Some people were like this. The more you spoke to them nicely, the more they would ignore you. On the other hand, if you hardened your tone, the other party would be terrified. Thinking about Su Yozhen, Yang Qindong's lips curved into a smile. This was a sense of confidence after he had control of the situation. At this moment, he heard a very clear hawking voice. Elixirs for sale. Elixirs for sale. Elixirs for sale. Elixirs for sale. If you eat my elixirs, you can prolong your life and stay young forever. This shout was very loud, at least far louder than the shouts of other people on the street. It also attracted the attention of Yang Qindong, who was sitting in the sedan. Chapter 8:11. Because of Yang Qindong, many items that shouldn't have appeared had appeared in advance, causing the market to become more prosperous and diverse. However, the production capacity of Qiqian City wasn't very high, and there were too many merchants who wanted to get their hands on their goods. As a result, there was a shortage of goods in the Heavens Beyond Trading Company. Some people couldn't get their hands on the goods, even if they had the money. Thus, some people started to learn how to fake goods. Fake goods weren't a product of a certain period of time. Instead, it was a kind of business that people were forced to do. Thus, there were many new and interesting items in the market. There were even some items that were imitations. However, these things only looked similar. When you actually held them in your hands, they were too heavy and crude. But because they were cheap, they still managed to gain a certain market share. As a result, some goods that didn't even exist in the heavens beyond trading companies started to appear. However, things like immortal pills still attracted Yang Chendong's attention. Immortal pills were things that only existed in legends and were only recorded in the history books. It was as if they were just conjectures. How could they exist in this world? But now, there was actually someone hawking on the streets. It was impossible not to attract attention. Gently reaching out to touch the side curtain of the carriage, he saw a man dressed like a Taoist in a bagua robe peddling the goods in his hands. There were quite a number of people gathered in front of this stall, and it seemed to be very lively. Stop for a moment. Yang Chendong was also interested and called out to stop. The carriage that was in the midst of the commotion also stopped. The group of guards also widened their eyes and looked around, looking cautious and alert. The carriage stopped, and Yang Chendong walked out in large strides. He looked at Yang Si, who was waiting on the side of the carriage with a puzzled expression. He chuckled and said, "There is someone selling immortal pills over there. This young master is interested. Let's go take a look together." Okay. Since it was an invitation from the young master, Yang Si naturally wouldn't reject it. He smiled and nodded in agreement. The two of them, one servant and one master, followed by a few guards, walked towards the seemingly lively stall. As he got closer, Yang Chendong could finally see the so-called immortal pill in the other party's hand. It was golden, as if it was made of gold. From its appearance, it was quite interesting. Taoist priest, how much is this elixir? Before Yang Chendong could approach, someone in the crowd asked. I can't say that this is a sale, but an invitation. Only those who are fated will be able to obtain it. Let's put it this way, 1,000 taels per pill, no bargaining. The first part was a bit profound, but when it came to the price, the merchant's unscrupulous appearance was completely exposed. When they heard that it was 1,000 taels for one pill, the people who were originally interested in it all shook their heads. Originally, they thought that if the price was right, they would sell one back. Regardless of whether it was real or fake, they would just treat it as buying a fresh one. However, if it was 1,000 taels per pill, it was really too expensive. No one would spend so much money just because of curiosity. The crowd suddenly quieted down. When the Taoist priest saw that there was going to be an awkward silence, he couldn't help but say anxiously, "You guys don't believe me. This is the price. How can immortal pills not be a lot? Do you know that I met the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord in my dream? This was given to me by him. It is far from something that can be measured by money." With this explanation, some people who had already wanted to leave couldn't help but hesitate. Previously, they thought that this bet was a scammer. However, when they heard that this matter was linked to immortals and the price was so expensive, they couldn't help but hesitate. But after all, it was 1,000 taels. No matter who wanted to take out this much money, they would have to consider it carefully. This actually helped Yang Chendong. He laughed and squeezed through the crowd. "Come, let me see. If it is really something good, I will take all of your immortal pills." Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't really believe that there were immortal pills in this world. He just looked at it curiously. It would be fun to buy it for his two wives to play with. When the voice rang out, it naturally attracted everyone's curious gaze. This was a rich guest coming to visit. It was impossible not to attract everyone's attention. Because of this voice, Yang Qindong also quickly passed through the crowd and came in front of the Taoist priest. Other than Yang Si, who was following closely by his side, the other guards were blocked out of the crowd for a moment. This young master is someone who knows his stuff. Come up and take a look. Seeing that there was a guest, the Taoist priest's anxious expression changed. He laughed and handed the golden immortal pill in his hand to Yang Qindong. But because there was still a stall between them, his hand still couldn't reach in front of Yang Qindong. Since the Taoist priest couldn't pass it to him, Yang Qindong reached out to take it and squeezed his body forward. Just when his arm was about to touch the Taoist priest's palm, the Taoist priest's eyes suddenly flashed a murderous intent. Then he suddenly raised his left arm that hadn't moved. A black muzzle was aimed at Yang Qindong's body. The sudden accident caught everyone off guard. Even Yang Qindong instinctively moved his body sideways in the face of this unexpected situation. And just as he moved, a gunshot sounded. The flintlock hit Yang Qindong's body. The strong recoil made his body tremble. There's an assassin. Yang Si, who was following by the side, witnessed all of this with his own eyes. His eyes immediately turned red. His right hand touched his waist. There was a Type 54 that he always carried. Daring to assassinate the young master, no matter who this person was, he must die. His hand reached behind him. Yang Si's face quickly changed. It was not because of anything else, but because his hand was suddenly pressed down by someone. That person seemed to be incomparably strong. He actually made his body unable to move at all. Since they had set up a killing trap, the Taoist priest would not be the only killer. Among the crowd, there were many of his accomplices. Seeing that they had started to act, these people did not hide anymore. One by one, they used their own methods. Yang Qindong was hit by a flintlock at close range and fell to the ground. Yang Si, who was the closest, was also temporarily restrained. This kind of assassination scene was seriously a first. In the past, when there was an assassination, the clues would always be discovered at the first moment and then disappear into nothingness. It was a frightening but not dangerous existence. But like this time, at such a close range, it was really the first time that he was killed. If it was a normal time, Yang Qindong would still be vigilant with his qi. But today, as soon as he appeared, he shocked Dong Chunhua and made him retreat. This made him a little arrogant, coupled with the fact that this place was in the midst of a riot and a hubbub of voices. It was even more difficult to spot the problem in such an environment. This gave the enemy a chance to succeed. Yang Qindong was shot to the ground. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his face was a little pale. It was unknown whether he was alive or dead. But even so, the Taoist priest was still unwilling to die without seeing with his own eyes. He suddenly pushed the stall in front of him away, then held another loaded flintlock in his hand and aimed at Yang Qindong again. But this time, the target was not his body, but his head. After aiming at the target, the Taoist priest pulled the trigger. It looked like he was going to shoot Yang Qindong on the spot. Ah, get lost! It was at this moment that a loud shout rang out. Yang Si, who had his right arm pressed down, roared angrily. All the strength in his body erupted at this moment. He endured the pain of his dislocated right arm and rushed out from the crowd, arriving in front of the Taoist priest's gun. Bang! At this time, a gunshot sounded. This bullet hit Yang Si's body. The strong force pushed Yang Si away, causing him to fall on Yang Qindong, who was unconscious on the ground. It was this pounce that awakened Yang Qindong, who had suddenly received a blow. The moment he opened his eyes, he saw a few strong men slashing at Yang Si's back. After a few slashes, blood was dripping, and red blood covered the ground. Ah, Yang Si, Yang Qindong, who was awake, immediately shouted in his heart, Then, he suddenly jumped up from the ground. While holding Yangtze in his arms, he took out a desert eagle and fired at the assassins in front of him. Bang, bang, bang. Every time a shot was fired, blood would splatter. Under the powerful lethality of the desert eagle, 2 of the 3 people who were wielding the sword had their heads smashed, and their faces were unrecognizable. Another person was shot in the stomach, causing his intestines and blood to flow all over the ground. All of this happened in a very short period of time. At this time, the guards who were isolated from the crowd also reacted. With Captain Qiuvi as the leader, Ba Daojiang on the left, and Pang Yu on the right, the 3 members formed a 3-3 formation. They held the Type 95 in their hands and activated the burst mode. Anyone who dared to block in front of them, no matter if it was an assassin or an ordinary person who was watching the show, would become their enemy. The gunshots were endless, and one figure after another fell to the ground. Even the Taoist in the Taoist robe did not manage to escape. He was shot in the head by the angry Ba Daojiang and fell to the ground with blood all over his body. 6th young master, Qiuvi, and the other 2 formed the first echelon and came to Yang Chendong's side. The other guards were also rushing over. What are you looking at? Who has hemostatic medicine on them? Take it out. Yang Chendong shouted crazily. At this time, his body was covered in blood, all of which flowed out from Yangtze's body. In order to protect himself, this person forcefully dislocated his arm, took a shot, and was even slashed several times. He was already on the verge of death. Chapter 8:12. I have it. Ba Daojiang reached into his chest and took out a small white porcelain bottle. People like him, who had been in the Jianghu for a long time, naturally carried hemostatic medicine with them. He reached out and took it, then quickly laid Yangtze's body flat. First, he used a little force to reattach the dislocated arm. Then, he tore apart Yangtze's clothes, revealing a layer of bulletproof vest inside. When it was taken off, a bloody red back was revealed. When the porcelain bottle was opened, the powder sprinkled on the back like rain, immediately causing Yangtze's body to twitch. It was obvious that the effect of the medicine was good. It had the effect of reducing inflammation and stopping bleeding. Yangtze's body also reacted. It was a good thing that there was a reaction. At least it meant that Yangtze's body was still breathing. Yang Chendong was immediately overjoyed. He shouted loudly, "Yangtze, you have to hold on. Hold on. With the young master here, you will be fine. Men, quickly bring the carriage here." Just as Yang Chendong was about to save Yangtze, a large number of Ming soldiers suddenly appeared on the street. As soon as they appeared, the originally bustling street instantly became empty. The black cavalry guards also widened their eyes and stared at the newcomers. Many of them even took out the 95 style. Previously, it was because they were careless and did not fulfill their duties that the 6th young master was in danger. Now that they were prepared, how could they let the previous incident happen again? Under the black muzzles of the guns, the Ming soldiers who came from afar trembled. The leader, who was wearing a general's uniform, was sweating profusely. He led his men forward and shouted, "Everyone, don't be nervous. I am Dong Bao, the general of the Yongding Gate. What happened here?" Actually, there was no need to ask. Looking at the formation in front of him, especially the Black Knights with obvious markings, Dong Bao knew that the Duke of Loyalty was in danger. It was only because this place was the closest to the Yongding Gate that he had to come and take a look. Otherwise, he was afraid that if his superiors blamed him, he would have to bear the consequences. The person reported his name with a careful and cautious expression. The Black Knights noticed this, and their gazes landed on Captain Qiuvi. Qiuvi naturally couldn't make the decision on such an important matter. he glanced at Yang Chendong cautiously and asked, "Sixth young master, the general guarding the Yongding gate is here. What do you think? Call him over." He was worried about Yang Xi's injury and thought that it would be best to find a quiet place immediately and find a doctor to treat him. So at this time, he couldn't think of anything else. Hearing Yang Chendong's order, Chiu Vi immediately responded. Then he said to Dong Bao, who was still trembling with fear, "General Dong, come over." "Yes, yes." Dong Bao answered like a lackey and trotted forward with his head lowered. However, the moment he lowered his head, his previous panic disappeared and was replaced by a look of determination. Because his head was lowered, no one noticed his change at all. Dong Bao trotted toward Yang Chendong. When he was 5 meters away, Chiu Vi suddenly shouted, "Okay, just stand there." With the previous lesson, he would never allow an unknown person to be so close to the sixth young master. With this shout, Dong Bao's body involuntarily slowed down. However, his body did not stop obediently. Instead, he continued to move forward. As he walked, he said, "We are so far away. How can I listen to the Duke of Loyalty's admonition? If I tell you to stop, then stop. If you continue to move forward, I will shoot." Seeing that Dong Bao was already 4 meters away, but he still didn't stop, Ba Daojiang's eyes flashed with anger, and he shouted loudly. With this shout, the meaning of reminder and warning was very obvious. Even Yang Chendong, who had been lowering his head to check on Yang Xi's injuries, couldn't help but raise his head. When he raised his head, he suddenly shouted, "Not good! Everyone spread out." As he spoke, Yang Chendong was the first to retreat with Yang Xi in his arms. With a leap, he covered a distance of 2 to 3 meters. Chiu Vi, Ba Daojiang, and Peng Yu, who were the closest, had long been used to following Yang Chendong's orders. This shout was equivalent to an order, and they quickly retreated into the distance. With this shout, Dong Bao's body suddenly emitted green smoke. That was the appearance of gunpowder after it was ignited. Then, with a face full of laughter, Dong Bao immediately followed in the direction Yang Chendong ran in. Bang! He fired a shot, completely relying on his intuition. He even skipped the process of aiming. With this shot, Dong Bao, who was moving forward, fell to his knees with a thud. It was also at this moment that he realized in horror that his right knee had been smashed and he could no longer maintain the posture of moving forward. The sound of the gunshot shocked everyone. However, with an even louder explosion, the gunpowder in Dong Bao's body exploded. In an instant, everything within 3 meters of Dong Bao was turned into nothingness. The place where he was previously standing was also turned into a deep pit, indicating the powerful power of the gunpowder. Ah, they killed General Dong. This is clearly a rebellion. Brothers, let's kill them together. Just after this explosion, a voice suddenly came from the crowd of Ming army. Then, a gunshot rang out, and a black knight on a horse fell to the ground. Looking carefully, that gunshot was fired by the Ming army. This time, Chao Xian got a total of 3 guns. 2 of them were on the Taoist priest, and the other one was hidden in the Ming army as a backup. With this gunshot, a black knight fell from his horse. The situation that was originally under control became chaotic again. More and more Ming soldiers began to attack the Black Knights and Yang Chendong. It was obvious that they wanted to use their advantage in numbers to completely engulf them. Although Dong Bao was dead, the number of soldiers he brought with him was not small. From a distance, there were at least 500 or 600 people. Moreover, this did not exclude the possibility that there might be assassins in the dark and more soldiers gathering to attack. On the other hand, Yang Chendong only had about 50 people from the first guard squad. This was more than 10 times the number of soldiers they had. As the captain, Chiu Vi suddenly felt a lot of pressure. At this time, the carriage was already in front of Yang Chendong. Because he dodged quickly, Dong Bao's human bomb didn't hit him. However, the power of the aftershock was still not small. It hit his back, and at this time, the green clothes he was wearing were already tattered. Fortunately, it was winter, so he wore a lot of thick clothes. Even so, the bulletproof vest still revealed some of his true colors. Fire the signal flare. Before the reinforcements arrive, no one is allowed to get close to the carriage. This is an absolute order. With both hands holding the unconscious and bleeding Yang Si, Yang Chendong gave the absolute order to Chiu Vi with a cold face. Sixth young master, don't worry. Unless all the soldiers are sacrificed, no one is allowed to get close to the carriage. Chiu Vi saluted with a serious expression. After watching Yang Chendong enter the carriage, he turned around and took out a signal flare from his waist. As a person who followed the sixth young master, he naturally carried a signal flare with him at all times. But there weren't many situations where he could actually use it. Every time he used it, it meant that the situation was critical and dangerous. Bang! With a loud sound, a powerful red signal flare rose into the air. Although it was still daytime, the signal flare was still very eye-catching to ensure that it would attract people's attention. After the signal flare was fired, Chiu Vi stood in front of the carriage and looked at the first guard squad members who were looking at him because of the signal flare. He said in a loud voice, "The sixth young master ordered that no one is allowed to get close to the carriage. The rest is up to my comrades." Yes, everyone shouted in unison from the bottom of their hearts. After the 49 guard squad members responded, they quickly began to retreat. While they were retreating, the 95 style in their hands spewed out flames and shot fatal bullets at the enemies charging at them. Just as Chiu Vi was worried, the enemy wasn't just the 500 or 600 people in front of them. As the gunshots rang out, the Ming soldiers who were charging at the front fell to the ground one by one. Many men dressed in black appeared from the sides and behind them. They held bows and crossbows in their hands and quickly approached them while continuously shooting arrows. They looked like they were going to eat the first guard squad members alive. After more than 200 Ming soldiers were killed, they learned to be smart. They didn't charge blindly. Instead, they took advantage of the complicated terrain on the street and began to look for a place to hide. Once they were safe, they would immediately pick up the bows on their backs and launch a long-range counterattack. It was true that they were not a match for the continuous fire guns, but they did not believe that these dozens of people would be able to carry much ammunition. Even if they had to exhaust the mercenaries, they had to exhaust them. The signal flare for help had been sent out, but it would take some time for them to appear. How to control the situation during this time, prevent the enemy from approaching the carriage, and complete the task given by the sixth young master became the most important problem. Just as the dead man thought, when they went out this time, because there was no plan at all, each soldier didn't bring a lot of bullets. In addition to the magazine and the gun, each soldier only brought 2 more. They thought that after a fierce attack, the enemies would be afraid and retreat. But the enemies in front of them were very tenacious. They looked like they didn't care about their lives. Coupled with the complicated terrain, the power of the 95 style was greatly restrained. Just like the previous wave of attacks, each soldier used up a magazine. If they continued like before, at most 2 more waves of attacks, they would run out of ammunition. Chapter 8:13. Everyone, listen up. Switch from continuous fire to burst fire. Don't think about killing too many enemies. Focus on suppressing them and wait for reinforcements. Chiu Vi made the most accurate judgment on the battlefield after a simple analysis. Following his orders, the guards reduced the number of shots they fired. They would only fire back when the enemy's figure was completely revealed or when they were about to charge forward and threaten them. This was perhaps the biggest drawback of firearms. Unlike swords, knives, spears, swords, and staffs, which could be used repeatedly without logistical support, the number of bullets would decrease. The mercenaries changed their strategy and focused on stability. As the enemy, the northern Ming soldiers became even more arrogant. Seeing that there were no more bullets flying, they immediately shouted, "The enemy's muskets have run out of gunpowder. Next, it's our turn to attack. Brothers, let's charge. Kill the Duke of Loyalty, and everyone will be rewarded with 500 taels of silver and be promoted by 3 ranks." The effect of the shout was obvious. The northern Ming soldiers, who were originally under the threat of the 9-5 and had already found a place to hide, were all enraged when they heard such a reward. Then, they revealed their heads from the shadows. Then, while shooting arrows, they rushed onto the main street and launched a second attack on the guards. At the sides and back of the carriage, there were at least 40 black-clothed men moving about. They were using even more advanced crossbows and arrows. Within a distance of less than 100 meters, the threat of such weapons was extremely great. In just a short while, 7 or 8 guards had been hit by the arrows. If they weren't wearing bulletproof vests, they would have become cold corpses by now. There was a large army attacking from the front, and there were people causing trouble from the sides and the rear. The first guard squad fell into a bitter battle that they had never used before. As the captain, Chiovi had already finished the 9-5 and was using a pistol. Even the pistol's 2 spare magazines were used up. Now, there were less than 3 bullets left in the pistol. The security team members guarding the front also fired a burst of bullets, forcibly suppressing the enemy's second attack. Then, everyone's face was solemn as they reloaded their last spare magazine. They knew that this would be their last hope. The enemies in front of him were suppressed, and the men in black behind him threw down more than 20 corpses. However, the death rate didn't scare them away. These people were like members of a suicide squad. They didn't even look at the death of their companions. Their eyes were fixed on the carriage in front of them. Their target hadn't died yet, which meant that their mission hadn't been completed yet. They still had to continue on their journey. Xiao Vi fired the last few bullets from his pistol. However, the enemy was moving at high speed. He only managed to injure 1 person. Xiao Vi then holstered his pistol and pulled out the 3 bayonets from his waist. He shouted, "Soldiers on both sides, follow me. No matter what, we cannot let them get close to the carriage." Without firearms, Xiao Vi and the others would have to complete the mission given to them by the 6th young master, even if they had to use cold weapons. This was their mission and responsibility. Even if there was only 1 person left, no one would take a step back. "Charge!" Ba, Daojiang, Peng Yu, and the others responded enthusiastically. They also pulled out their bayonets and rushed towards the men in black. After that, there was a series of clanging sounds as the 2 sides fought each other, and the fight became a mess. Close combat was far crueler than using firearms to kill people. Often, even if they were beaten until they were covered in blood and had lost their arms, they could still pose a threat to their opponents with their steel teeth. In such a battle, it was basically impossible to escape unscathed. Even though the individual qualities of the guards were very strong, in a battle of life and death, it was still inevitable that they would be injured or even killed in battle. After only a few exchanges, half of the remaining 20 or so black-clothed men fell, and 2 of the guards were killed and 3 were injured. These men in black were the type that knew martial arts. In terms of individual combat strength, they were far superior to ordinary Ming soldiers. Even the embroidered uniform guards, who boasted extraordinary combat strength, could not reach their level. Moreover, the arrows in these men's hands were highly toxic. Once shot, it would not take long for them to foam at the mouth and suffocate to death. If the soldiers did not wear black armor outside and bulletproof vests inside, the number of casualties would be much higher than the men in black. Even so, Chiovi and the others did not intend to take half a step back. They were sad that their comrades had died, but they would not cry. They wanted to turn their sadness into motivation to kill more enemies and avenge their comrades. The rear was already engaged in a battle, and the guards were beginning to suffer casualties. The enemies in the front also tried to launch 2 small attacks. Perhaps it was because too many people had died before, so they were also afraid. But even if they were cautious enough to launch an attack, they still consumed a lot of the guards' bullets. Seeing that another big attack was coming, the 2 sides would inevitably have to fight with cold weapons. The situation was already very critical at this point. In the carriage, Yang Si had already been laid down flat. Fortunately, the space was big enough for Yang Chendong to use. Yang Chendong no longer cared about everything outside the carriage. Since he had handed the mission to Chiovi, he had to completely trust him. Right now, he had another mission to do, and that was to save Yang Si. Although Yang Si's identity was only a servant of the Yang family, whether in the eyes of Yang Chendong or in the eyes of outsiders, it was not like this. They seemed to have become his family, his closest relatives. How could Yang Chendong watch his closest relatives die in front of him and not care? Not to mention, Yang Si's injuries were caused by protecting himself, so there was no reason for him to not care. Speaking of which, Yang Si's body did not have any fatal injuries. Most of them were caused by external injuries. The only fatal injury was excessive blood loss. In the eyes of outsiders, this kind of excessive blood loss was naturally beyond their ability. However, for Yang Chendong, who had experienced hundreds of battles, suffered countless injuries, and completed countless life and death missions, it was not without a bit of hope. In the carriage, Yang Chendong first roughly checked Yang Si's injuries. After knowing that he fainted because of excessive blood loss, he disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, there were a few disposable infusion tubes and needles in his hands. Let's go all out. Although I haven't checked, I don't think there will be any changes to his blood type. He sighed to himself. In his past life, he was a type O all-purpose blood type. He had given blood to and received blood from his comrades more than once. Even without anyone's help, he could still do this job very well. As if he had done it many times before, Yang Chendong stabbed the needle into his arm. Outside the carriage, the battle was still ongoing. It had already been at a stalemate for more than an hour. The casualties on both sides were constantly increasing. 300 meters away, atop the high walls of a residence, Cao Qin was watching this scene with a fierce expression. Today's events were all part of his plan. By chance, his subordinates saw the imperial censor of the right enter the immortal abode and hurriedly reported it to him. Then, the massive battle plan was put into motion. First, the poison experts of the embroidered uniform guard entered the immortal abode, as if they were looking for someone, and sprinkled laxatives into Dong Chuanhua's food. Then, they waited for Yang Chendong to appear. As expected, this matter involved a major second-rank official. As expected, Yang Chendong had come to the capital. However, Cao Qin wasn't satisfied with the 50 or so guards at his side. But that didn't matter. The military strength he had arranged was several times that of the enemy's. Coupled with the sudden attack, they had at least a 70% chance of victory. The Taoist priest selling immortal pills was just a cover. Even Cao Qin himself wasn't sure if it would pique Yang Chendong's curiosity. If it didn't work, then they could only wait for the Duke of Loyalty to arrive at the Yongding Gate. The heavens seemed to be very fond of him. Yang Chendong really stopped, and this made Cao Xian extremely excited. He seemed to have already seen the scene of Yang Chendong's death. He saw the scene of Yang Chendong's death leading to a fight between the mercenaries and the northern Ming dynasty, and the southern Ming dynasty reaping the benefits. But another accident disrupted Chao Qin's plans. Those black-clad guards were actually so difficult to deal with. Again and again, even after using the 3 guns he'd spent so much effort to obtain, they still couldn't kill Yang Qindong. This made him feel like he'd punched an iron pot. He knew that he wouldn't have another chance. Helpless, Chao Qin gave the order to attack with all his might. He sent out all the experts he'd brought with him from Ming, looking like he was willing to sacrifice everyone to complete this mission. As the battle continued, the situation seemed to become more and more unfavorable for him. Chao Qin's heart became heavier and heavier when he saw the mercenaries in black armor, making him feel helpless. Most of the casualties were his own warriors. "Sir, look over there. Is that Ming's army?" At this moment, a subordinate's voice sounded in his ear, attracting Chao Qin's attention. After an hour, the Ming army in the city finally made a move. A large number of soldiers rushed over. Speaking of which, Ming's army shouldn't take so long to react to something like this. In fact, less than half an hour after the incident happened, the higher-ups in the Ming army knew about it. But when they found out that the Duke of Loyalty was involved, they didn't immediately send out the order to send troops. Instead, they sent someone to report the news to the palace. Unexpectedly, they didn't receive the order immediately. It turned out that the acting sect master, Zhu Qiyu, was hesitating. Chapter 8:14. He was certain that he had not given the order to kill Yang Qindong. The head eunuch beside him, Ming, who was also the supervisor of the embroidered uniform guard, was also negotiating in the Yang manner. It was impossible for her to make a move against Yang Qindong. If that was the case, then this time it was not one of his own people who made a move. Since it was not one of his own people who made a move, what did it have to do with him? He would just let them make a fuss. If they really did kill Yang Qindong, it would not be his fault. He would also be able to get rid of a big problem in his heart. Wasn't that a good thing? Zhu Qiyu was only thinking about who would dare to kill Yang Qindong in the capital and make such a big fuss about it. It was at this time that the supervisor eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate, Chen Guan, asked for an audience. As soon as he saw the emperor, he knelt on the ground and shouted that the imperial city was in trouble and that he had come to protect the emperor. Chen Guan's sudden action was seen by Zhu Qiyu and was naturally puzzled. He did not understand why there was trouble out of the blue. With an unhappy expression, he asked, "Chen Guan, why are you so panicked? Your Majesty, don't you know that danger is descending?" Chen Guan raised his head and pretended to be very confused. "Speak." Zhu Qiyu did not like officials who played riddles with him. He was the emperor and did not need to spend any effort on this kind of thing. Seeing that Zhu Qiyu was a little angry, Chen Guan didn't dare to play any more tricks. He immediately changed his appearance and said very sincerely, "Your Majesty, although the Duke of Zhongdan's death wasn't caused by us, if he died in the capital, Ming wouldn't be able to escape responsibility. Those who do not understand will only think that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage died at our hands. How many people will ask for the truth? If that happens, the consequences will be unthinkable." Zhu Qiyu, who was originally standing there with his hands behind his back, moved slightly. His mouth opened and closed. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he gave up. He knew that Chen Guan was right. If the Duke of Loyalty really died in his territory, ignoring everything else, just the fact that he did not save him would cause Northern Ming to suffer. Under his guidance, Ming's army was growing stronger by the day, but this was not the reason why he wanted to fight to the death with the mercenaries. At least for now, the mercenaries were not his enemy. He wanted to first unify the Great Ming and resolve the internal problems before he could turn around and deal with others. This was the need to first settle the internal problems. Zhu Qiyu was thinking, so he did not immediately make a decision. Chun Guan, who was kneeling on the ground, was already drenched in cold sweat from the shock. In the palace, there were constant infighting, both open and covert. Choosing a side was of the utmost importance. Chun Guan had chosen Jining as his master. The eunuch group was so big that Jining alone could not make the decision. Below him was the powerful Gao Rang. This person was the supervisor eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate and the director of the East Depot. He was someone who could wrestle with Jining. If Jining died in Yangjia village, it could be imagined that an internal cleansing would be inevitable. As Jin Ying's assistant in the Imperial Horse Directorate, Gao Rang's fate could be imagined. He had no choice but to stand out. This time, he owed a favor to Dai Zong. Not only was he saving Jining, he was also saving himself. He had no choice but to come. After a long time, under Chun Guan's expectant gaze, Zhu Qiyu finally opened his mouth. Issue an edict. Zhang Rang is to bring people to the rescue and protect the Duke of Loyalty and Courage's life. Chun Guan's expectant face could not help but reveal a trace of disappointment. However, he knew that this was the emperor's greatest concession. He immediately kowtowed and said, "This official obeys." After Chun Guan left, Zhu Qiyu finally turned his head and looked up at the roof of a large hall. He muttered, "I have done what I should. Everything will be up to the will of the heavens." The so-called will of the heavens was a trace of unwillingness in Zhu Qiyu's heart. He did not want to miss the opportunity to kill Yang Qindong, but he also did not want to be too obvious. Thus, he handed the matter over to Zhang Rang. He believed that Zhang Rang should understand his intentions. If he had been a step late, perhaps a great danger could have been eliminated. From this, it could be seen that the emperor was wise. He was well aware of the internal strife within the eunuch group. Perhaps this was what he wanted to see, or perhaps he had caused it. After receiving the imperial edict, Gao Rang began to gather the members of the Eastern Faction Guards. Then, he unhurriedly headed in the direction of the Yongding Gate. At the same time, he also sent people to closely observe the movements in the direction of the Yang Manor, so that he could make the best judgment. He watched the battle in the distance. When he saw the black-clothed assassin and the black-clad warrior fighting to the death, and when both sides were injured, Gao Rang's expression did not change. It was as if what was happening in front of him was not a life-and-death duel, but just a child's game. Since the emperor had given this task to him, he naturally understood the meaning behind it. What he needed to do was to wait and see. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would not casually make a move. Not only that, but he also led the eunuchs of the Eastern Faction Guards to block the other Biming soldiers who had rushed here. Not only would he not casually make a move, but he would also not allow others to make a move. However, when news came from the south, Gao Rang's brows furrowed slightly. He knew that things were still out of his expectations. There was finally movement in the direction of the Yang Manor. The spies from the Eastern faction said that they saw cavalry rushing over. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, your luck is not bad. Seemingly sighing softly, Gao Rang turned around and gave the order to dispatch the troops. On the battlefield, Qiu Vi, whose body was half covered in blood, stabbed the military knife in his hand into the chest of another black-clothed man. In exchange, blood spurted out and dyed his black armor red again. However, he did not seem to have hurt it. He even frowned. His left hand unconsciously reached deep behind his waist, where the signal gun was. He was already considering whether to fire a blue signal flare. A red signal flare meant that there was a crisis, and it was somewhat urgent. However, if a blue signal flare was fired, It would mean a great crisis. Seeing this, no matter what mission one was in charge of, one had to immediately come to the scene and carry out a rescue mission. From what Chiovi knew, there were many mercenary brothers in the capital. For example, there was at least a platoon of Cold Vanguard guarding the Yang family bank. Moreover, they had sufficient ammunition all year round. Once they appeared here, they would become a powerful force. There were also the spies of the Security Bureau in the city. They were not few in number, and their skills were probably not ordinary. They were also a military force that could not be underestimated. Just now, Chiovi had such thoughts. He had also looked in the direction of the carriage more than once. However, from start to finish, the sixth young master's figure had never appeared. Without orders, he did not dare to approach and ask for instructions. However, it seemed that the situation had reached the most critical moment. If he did not ask for reinforcements now, he would not have the chance to ask for reinforcements. His eyes were filled with hesitation and struggle, but in the end, for the sake of the sixth young master's safety, Cho Wu made up his mind to fire the bomb for help. But at this moment, a large group of East faction depot eunuchs charged out of the inner city of the capital. They were all nimble and robust, and the moment they appeared, they rushed over from all directions like locusts. Just as the East faction depot eunuchs appeared, a group of black-clothed cavalry rushed out from the Yongding Gate. Although there were not many of them, they were exceptionally brave. Each one of them rode on horseback and waved their sharp sabers. They rushed behind the Ming soldiers. Every time they swung their sabers down, a Ming soldier's head would fly into the air. "It's the second guard squad. Comrades, kill them." Although they were still far away, Chiovi could clearly see that they were his brothers from the second guard squad. His face immediately lit up with joy. While he raised the morale of his comrades with a shout, he also felt as if his body was filled with endless strength. He rushed to kill the nearest black-clothed man. Beta Persei had arrived. Yang San had arrived. Dao Xiao had also arrived. Behind them, Commander Xiao Feng had also arrived with the main force of the Cold Front. Only the Wolf Fang Special Forces and the Ghost Shadow Sniper team were left in the Yang family village. This time, all of them had come out because they had seen the red signal flare. As the only cavalry team, Beta Persei personally went into battle. He immediately ended the negotiations, took control of Jining, and rode over. However, he still encountered 4 sniper attacks along the way. After he consecutively threw the heads of more than a dozen enemies into the air, he finally broke through the obstacles, rushed into the Yongding Gate, and rushed behind the enemy. It was precisely because he knew that Beta Persei and the others had arrived that Gao Rang stopped watching and chose to take the initiative to attack. The 2 reinforcements appeared from the north and the south. The ones who suffered were the southern Ming men of sacrifice who were still desperately trying to get close to the target carriage. Originally, everything was under control, and the plan was proceeding very smoothly. In fact, they had enough time for 2 hours. However, who would have thought that these Black Knights were really too difficult to deal with? After they had used up all the ammunition in their hands, they chose to fight in close combat. Then they used a very strange tactic to forcibly block the southern Ming men beside the carriage. This made the carriage seem very close, but in fact, it was very far away. If they had originally wanted to use their last bit of strength to try and complete the mission, with the appearance of the Black Knights and Ming finally making a move, their mission was destined to be impossible. Chao Xian, who was hiding on the high wall of a house, shook his head with a look of disappointment. "Let's go. We'll leave through the secret passage immediately." He knew that if he did not leave now, he would not have the chance to leave again. With the arrival of Beta Persei and the other Black Knights, the enemy's morale was depleted. They only resisted for less than a quarter of an hour before they were all killed. At this moment, Gao Rang and a group of Eastern faction guards, eunuchs, appeared 100 meters north of the carriage. Qiu Vi held his sword and faced them. Although he felt a sense of exhaustion, he still had no intention of retreating. He only stared at Gao Rang and the others in front of him to ensure that if the other party wanted to attack, he would become a mountain and block the enemy's attack. Alert! Everyone alert! Show your weapons. If there are any blind people, just shoot and kill. If you kill someone, it's on me. Beta Persei jumped down from his warhorse as he spoke to Yang San, Dao Xiao, and the others behind him. Chapter 8:15. Although they left in a hurry, they still brought a lot of ammunition with them. When the second guard squad delivered the bullets to the first squad, the faces of the guards of the two squads were brimming with confidence again. It was as if with guns in hand, they had the power to rule the world. On the opposite side of Gao Rang, rows upon rows of rifles were ready to fire. There were even 3 machine guns of the 9th and 5th squad that were quickly set up, forming a perfect blockade. In this tense atmosphere, looking at the steel sword in his hand, Gao Rang wisely made the decision to stop moving forward. Beside the carriage, Beta Persei knelt on the ground and shouted with his unique loud voice, "Young master, Beta Persei is late, please forgive me. Don't say any more. Let's go back to Yongjia village." A slightly weak voice sounded. Yang Chendong, who had just drawn 400 cubic centimeters of blood, was a little weak, so when he said this sentence, he gave people a sense of lack of confidence. Yang Chendong's answer was a little weak, which shocked Beta Persei, who had been following him. He wanted to open the carriage door, to take a look, but he did not dare to do so without an order. He could only agree, then stood up and shouted, "Young master has ordered the entire army to retreat to Yongjia village." The carriage was driven by Yang San himself. The head of the security bureau was a little pale. Such a big assassination operation, but there was no warning beforehand. This was his dereliction of duty. Now, driving the carriage was just an expression of guilt. East factory manager, Gao Rang has come to protect the Duke of Loyalty under the orders of the Daizong. Please see him. At this moment, Gao Rang's shout came with the wind. He knew that Yang Chendong would not believe anyone at this time, but he still had to shout out his attitude. Otherwise, Bai Ming would not be able to get away from this assassination. No one answered Gao Rang's words. Only the cold wind continued to blow, and the enemy's corpses were scattered all over the ground. In this battle, 9 members of the first guard squad died, and 18 were injured. The corpses of their dead comrades were naturally carried away, leaving behind the corpses of the southern Ming men of sacrifice. Although they were still far away, the smell of blood could still be smelled. It was as if to say how crazy and cruel the battle just now was. Yang San, steady yourself. As soon as the carriage exited the Yongding gate, Yang Chendong, who was driving the carriage, heard Yang Chendong's voice. He had no choice but to slow down. Fortunately, they were already out of the capital, and Xiao Feng and his cold-edged soldiers could be seen on the sides of the road. The danger had passed, and they were finally safe. After about an hour of steady travel, the luxurious carriage finally entered the Yang clan manor. At the entrance of the manor, 2nd Madame Chiao Yin, 4th Madame Lady Xiang, 7th Sister Yang Duo, and everyone from the Yang Family Academy had already come out to welcome them. They only saw the red signal flare rise into the sky, but they didn't know what exactly happened. The carriage is here. From afar, many people heaved a sigh of relief when they saw the iconic carriage appear under the protection of the Black Knights. Since the carriage was fine, the 6th young master was probably fine as well. But there were also some sharp-eyed people who saw the 9 corpses on the horses, and their expressions turned grave. Who were these Black Knights? They were definitely the strongest force of the mercenaries, or else they wouldn't have been assigned to the 6th young master's side. But even they had lost so many people, so one could easily imagine how intense the battle had been. Yang Sen drove the carriage to a stop in front of the two madams, but before the two madams could say anything, Yang Qindong's voice came from within the carriage. "Go to the Academy's infirmary." Oh, Yang Sen agreed and smiled apologetically at the two madams. Then the carriage drove away. Unlike before, it wasn't just the Black Knights following them, but also a few other women. The carriage finally stopped in front of the Academy's infirmary. Yang Sen took the initiative to open the carriage door, revealing a very pale Yang Qindong. Yang San's eyes were filled with tears when he saw the wise and mighty 6th young master become like this, and even his green robe was already in tatters. "Young master, it's our fault. We didn't foresee this in advance. Well, this matter has nothing to do with you." Yang Qindong reached out and patted Yang Sen on the shoulder, then jumped off the carriage and said to Beta Persei, "You two carry Yang Si down, and remember to be careful. By the way, where is Yuan Heping?" After Yang Qindong shouted, a man in his 30s among the academy students immediately responded, "Dean, Heping is here. Come here." Seeing Yuan Heping, a smile finally appeared on Yang Qindong's face. This person came from a medical family. Although he was young, he was already quite famous in the middle-aged field. Later, he came to the Yang Qindong Academy and was chosen by the second dean, Wang Si. He stayed there to learn Western medicine and made rapid progress. He was the person with the best medical results among Yang Qindong's forces. "Heping, you also get on the carriage. Yang Si is receiving an infusion. You hold the bottle and be careful." Yang Qindong called Yuan Heping over, patted him on the shoulder, and then walked in the direction of the two madams. With Yuan Heping's help, Yang Si was lifted out of the carriage. His body was covered in blood, and as soon as his pale and colorless face appeared, it caused a series of gasps. In the crowd, 4th Madam's personal maid, Xiao Wei, exclaimed and was about to run forward, but she was stopped by Yang Qindong, who was already prepared. "Don't be so agitated. Your husband can be saved, but if you go up and cause trouble, then it's not certain." Xiao Wei was Yang Si's wife. Her marriage was personally arranged by Yang Qindong. As a wife, how could she not be moved by her husband's current state? Right now, she just wanted to lie on Yang Si's body and cry. However, since these words were said by the 6th young master, Xiao Wei naturally didn't dare to disobey. She could only retreat to the side with tears in her eyes. Yang Qindong signaled to 4th Madam with his eyes, asking her to take care of Xiao Wei. Then he looked at Xiao Yin and 7th Sister Yang Duo and said, "Do you have clean clothes? I'm too dirty right now. I don't even have a shape." "Let's go." Xiao Yin and Yang Duo took a step forward at the same time. One in each hand, pulled Yang Qindong into the inner courtyard of the Yang Manor. Along the way, there was a burst of crying. Fortunately, they learned that Yang Qindong wasn't seriously injured. Only then did they relax a lot. "Young master, can Yang Si be saved?" Xiao Yin's worry shifted to the heavily injured Yang Si. When Yang Qindong wasn't here, this person had always stayed in the manor to protect them. After interacting with him for a long time, they naturally had feelings for each other. Just like how Huyen called Yang Qindong Dong Shui in private, Xiao Yin was also used to calling him young master in private. Yang Qindong corrected her a few times, but found that it was useless. Hearing Xiao Yin's question, he nodded confidently. He can definitely be saved. After washing up, Yang Qindong went from the inner courtyard to the academy's infirmary. Although it was called an infirmary, it was actually a small hospital. It covered an area of several thousand square meters and had more than 10 beds. There was also a special room for receiving patients. When Yang Chendong appeared, he was quickly surrounded by people. The most excited of them all was Yuan Heping. Dean, Brother Yangtze is receiving an infusion. Is it the blood you usually talk about in class? That's right. It's blood. Yang Chendong nodded. He looked at Yuan Heping and asked, "Have you checked if there are any life-threatening injuries on his body?" "I've checked. There aren't any life-threatening injuries. Some wounds have already stopped bleeding after applying medicine. They're in good condition. Next, he just needs to replenish enough blood. There shouldn't be any major problems," Yuan Heping said confidently. He had never thought about infusions, especially blood transfusions, to save people. He admitted that he wasn't as good as the dean in these matters. However, when it came to treating people with Chinese medicine, he was confident that there weren't many people who were better than him. Yang Chendong was still very confident in Yuan Heping's Chinese medicine skills. He immediately nodded. "Okay, as long as there are no other life-threatening injuries. Then I'll teach you how to test blood types from now on. Remember, only people with the same blood type can transfuse with each other and not be rejected. You must remember this point clearly. Go and gather the other students who are interested in learning medicine." While asking Yuan Heping to gather the people, Yang Chendong waved his hand. His servant, Yang Lu, came to Yang Chendong with a ritual instrument. This was the blood test instrument, a big warehouse item. This time, Yang Chendong wanted to take the opportunity to teach everyone new knowledge. What happened today also reminded Yang Chendong that it was necessary to establish personal health records for the people close to him and the higher-ups in the military. For example, the history of genetic diseases, some things that required taboos, and blood types all needed to be recorded. Otherwise, if there was a problem and he wasn't there, wouldn't there be a real problem? With the blood test, Yang Chendong started to operate it in front of Yuan Heping and the other students. After a few times, he saw that Yuan Heping was doing it himself, and there was nothing wrong with the blood test, so he handed the job over. "Yangtze has type B blood. Let's see who has type B blood. If you are healthy and are willing to donate blood, please prepare more. If it's not enough, use the all-purpose O. You understand?" Also, when a person's body has been in it for a long time, there will always be some blood in it. The quality of this blood is not good. Some blood should be discharged within a certain period of time. It doesn't matter if it's not more than 200 milliliters at a time. On the contrary, it will be beneficial to the human body's metabolism. You must make this clear to everyone. Blood donation can't be forced. For example, I donated 400 milliliters at a time. I can't force it. Yang Chendong had to make these things clear. Otherwise, everyone would misunderstand the blood donation and think that it would harm their bodies. If that was the case, then there would be problems. He had set himself as an example by donating 400 milliliters first. This was a clear example. It should dispel some people's misgivings. Chapter 8:16. Dean, I understand. His face was filled with excitement and emotion. Whether it was the blood test or the blood transfusion, to save people, it was like a new window had been opened, allowing Yuan Heping to see a new world. He could even assert that once the blood transfusion to save people worked, who knew how many people would benefit and how many people would be saved from the brink of death. Of course, all of these procedures had to be up to standard. Only when there were no problems would it be considered saving people. Otherwise, it would be harming people. In the ward, Yangtze was lying peacefully. After the fresh blood entered his body, his condition was much better than before. At least, there was more color on his face. This made Xiaowei, who had been accompanying him, extremely excited. When she saw that it was the 6th young master who had entered the ward, she hurriedly stood up in a panic and wanted to kneel on the ground to thank him. Yang Chendong was quick to react. He blocked the kneeling knee and shook his head gently. "Don't thank me. I should be thanking Yangtze. If it wasn't for him, I'm afraid I would be a dead man." No, the sixth young master is invincible. Even God is afraid of you. He would never dare to accept you. Xiao Wei was shocked when she heard Yang Chendong's words of gratitude. As a servant, shouldn't it be his duty to protect the master? How could he deserve a word of thanks? Yang Chendong did not explain anything. Instead, he carefully observed Yangtze's condition. When he found that everything had stabilized, he was relieved. After comforting him for a while, he left the ward. Outside, Beta Persei, Yang San, Yang Lu, Chiovi, Dao Xiao, and the others were all looking at him as if they were looking at a god. They had all seen Yangtze's injuries, especially Chiovi. As the first person besides Yang Chendong to see the injuries, his first thought was that Brother Yangtze was definitely going to die, although it was difficult for him to accept the news. And he was very sad. There were always deaths when looking for a fight. To be able to die protecting the sixth young master was originally a very glorious thing. However, he never expected that he would be saved. Although he was still in a coma, didn't Yuan Heping say that he had lost a lot of blood? It was just excessive blood loss, nothing serious. It was only a matter of time before he woke up. A person who had been stabbed so many times that the bones in his back were exposed. His entire body had long been dyed red with blood. Even a person who was called by the King of Hell could be saved alive. At this moment, this only increased their respect for the sixth young master. If they followed such a person, what else did they have to worry about? What else did they have to worry about? Seeing a few pairs of eyes looking at him with admiration, Yang Chendong coughed softly. He took this opportunity to teach these tough men who killed without blinking on the battlefield a lesson. Do you see? This is the importance of knowledge. In the future, when you face doctors, teachers, and some scientific researchers, you have to be more polite. Sometimes, bravery alone is useless. Brains and knowledge play an especially important role. Yes, we understand. Beta Persei and the others nodded in agreement. Yang Chendong was just taking this opportunity to improve the status of a cultured person. If a country wanted to develop, it was not enough to rely on strong military force. Cultivating both civil and military skills was the long-term way. Okay, Yangtze should be fine. You don't have to stay here. Go do whatever you need to do. Yes, young master. Jean Ing is still detained by us in the village. How do you want to deal with her? Beta Persei nodded repeatedly. Then he thought of the representatives of Ming and became angry. At the beginning of the battle, Ming could have saved her, but they did not. No matter how they dealt with Jean Ing now, it would not be too much. I'll take care of his matters myself. You just have to accompany me later. Of course, Yang Chendong was aware of what had happened at the scene. Although he had been in the carriage to save people, he was equally aware of what had happened outside. Beta Persei had just finished speaking when Yang Sen continued. Young master, our security bureau has not done well this time. I have already ordered the removal of the current director of the Security Bureau of Ming from his position in the capital. He will be brought back to Chichen City for investigation. At the same time, I also sent someone to the scene to investigate and confirmed that the person behind the assassination was hiding in a house 300 meters away from the scene. It was only because he retreated quickly that he escaped first. Now, our people have already caught up. Although we may not be able to catch the murderer, it is still possible to find out the true identity of the culprit based on these clues. This time, the Security Bureau had not received any news beforehand. It was true that they had not done their job well. But when he thought about it, wasn't he too careless? He had thought that Jean Ing would negotiate with him on behalf of Ming, so he could sit back and relax. He had lost the vigilance that he should have. Even when he entered the capital, he did not bring enough armed forces with him. In the end, 9 of his brothers were killed. He was also responsible for this. Even if he was responsible, Yang Qindong did not want to blame others. He did not want to do such a thing that was already lenient to others, so after listening to Yang San's report, he waved his hand. I won't ask what the Security Bureau wants to do this time. In short, we must find the real culprit. We can't let our 9 brothers die in vain. Yes, young master, don't worry. They won't be able to escape. Yang San was grateful that Yang Qindong did not reprimand him, but at the same time, he made up his mind that he would not retreat until he found the real culprit. Even if the Security Bureau had to pay the price, he would accept it. All right, you guys go do your own things. Qiuvi, Dao Xiao, you guys do your job well at the memorial service. I will attend it personally. Beta Persei, let's go. Yang Qindong reached out and patted Captain Qiuvi's shoulder, then turned and left. Qiuvi and Dao Xiao, who were left behind, were extremely excited. Although the 9 brothers who had died protecting the 6th young master, this was their duty. Compared to the soldiers from other divisions, regiments, and battalions who had to fight for military merits on the battlefield, their treatment was better and their conditions were better. With this, no one would regret their deaths. Instead, it was a kind of glory. Didn't the 6th young master say that he would attend the memorial service personally? This was giving face to his brothers. Based on this, if something similar were to happen in the future, how could he worry that his brothers would not do their best? Qiuvi and the others were still feeling emotional and moved when Yang Qindong, accompanied by Beta Persei, arrived at the negotiation room in the academy. When the door was pushed open, they saw Chief Eunuch Jining and Commander Lu Gui of the Brocade Guard with bitter expressions on their faces. As soon as they saw Yang Qindong appear, they immediately stood up. Jin Ying's expression was even more careful, as if he wanted to smile, but did not dare to. As the recorder and a woman, Junko did not ride out of the manor with Beta Persei and the others after knowing that a red signal had appeared in the capital. She did not have the qualifications to do so. The only thing she could do was to stay behind and watch the actions of Jining and the others. In order to prevent these people from causing trouble, the captain of the Langyus Special Forces, Tai Hu, personally took action. He set up an array in the room and released his aura that had killed countless people. Even Lu Gui did not dare to move, let alone the others. Not long after, Yang Qindong and the others returned to the manor. Junko also ran over to take a look. She saw the pale Yang Qindong and Yang Si, who had lost too much blood and was barely alive. Just when she thought that brother Yang Si was definitely dead, her classmates in the academy sent her news. He had been saved using a very advanced technology called blood transfusion. Food could be transported, weapons and armor could be transported, and when could even the blood of a person be transported? Filled with curiosity, she went to take a look, and then saw a scene that shocked her. Bags of blood were really sent into Yang Si's body through plastic and transparent tubes. He was actually fine. This incident had a great impact on Junko's heart. She, who had been in the Yang family manor for 2 years, naturally knew a little about the strength of the mercenaries. But just the strength of the military was not surprising. Which dynasty didn't have the strongest army in the world in their hands? But what really caught Junko's attention was the knowledge taught in the Yang family's academy. This kind of teaching philosophy was completely different from Confucianism. It involved a wide range of knowledge, which was really an eye-opener for her. Perhaps this was the true reason why the mercenaries were so powerful. In 2 years, she believed that she had learned a lot of knowledge that she did not dare to think about before. But today's blood transfusion greatly stimulated her. Even a person who was bound to die could be saved. What else could the sixth young master not do? If one day the mercenaries really wanted to become enemies with Japan, what could they use to resist? What could they use to resist? Junko, who had complicated thoughts, focused her gaze on Yang Chendong the moment he pushed the door open. She could not move her gaze away for a long time. Yang Chendong, who was being looked at, did not care, because the moment he pushed the door open, almost everyone in the room looked at him, especially Jin Ying's gaze. There was respect, fear, and even a bit of flattery in her eyes. Yes, this popular person by Daizong's side was someone that even the ministers wanted to curry favor with. At this moment, when she looked at Yang Chendong, she showed a flattering expression. What happened had not been hidden from him. On the contrary, someone had specially reported it to him. It was because of this that Jin Ying very keenly discovered the problem. In this operation, although Ming was not the main culprit, they could not shirk their responsibility. The assassins were probably not sent by Emperor Daizong. Otherwise, why would he waste his time negotiating with the mercenaries here? But it was true that they were not the ones who sent the assassins, but they did not take any action to save him. This was too wrong. Chapter 817. Jin Ying could even guess that the moment this incident occurred, the news must have reached the emperor as soon as possible. The emperor was probably already thinking about getting someone else to do his dirty work. But he also didn't think about it. If the Duke of Loyalty had really met with an accident in Ming's capital, the mercenaries wouldn't just let it go. At that time, no one would listen to their explanation, and a major battle would be unavoidable. Putting aside whether or not Ming could win, at the very least, they would have lost the chance to destroy the southern Ming Empire and contend for hegemony over the world. Jin Ying did not believe that the emperor, who had always been wise and farsighted, would not be able to see such a simple logic. The reason he had not done so was probably because he was too afraid of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage and wanted him dead too much. Fortunately, at the last moment, Ming had still sent out their troops. This action would at least win back some points and some trust. This was why Jin Ying was gratified, but also why he was hesitant, because this was only his own wishful thinking. He wasn't sure if Yang Chendong would think this way. If Yang Chendong blamed the assassination on him and killed him in a fit of rage, then given the current situation, even if the emperor was angry, there would be nothing he could do. This also meant that Jin Ying's life was in Yang Chendong's hands. How could Jin Ying not be afraid of this man who could decide his life and death with a single word? How could he not curry favor with him? Jin Ying smiled obsequiously. Lu Gui and the others lowered their heads, not daring to meet Yang Chendong's gaze. The atmosphere in the room suddenly quieted down. "I'm very angry." It was still Yang Chendong who spoke first. He found the chair at the head of the group and sat down. His gaze fell on Jin Ying and Lu Gui as he spoke. "Yes, this Gong Gong can understand." Jin Ying also spoke up. "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, I can guarantee that this matter is definitely not His Majesty's intention. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here to negotiate with you. As for Dong Chunhua, who started the trouble, she will be severely punished. I can assure you of this." Jin Ying had taken the initiative to throw Dong Chunhua out to express her attitude. She was saying that she had the same attitude as Dong Chunhua on this matter. Yang Chendong was quite satisfied with this attitude, but if this was the only benefit, he would definitely not agree. "It's not enough." Jian Jie's words expressed his feelings. "Yes, what else should I do? Please tell me, High Duke. As long as I can do it, I will do my best." Jin Ying also knew that throwing out Dong Chunhua was not enough to appease Yang Chendong's anger. Even though he was already a second-rank official of the imperial court, Jin Ying's sensible behavior made Yang Chendong, who had been keeping a straight face, finally smile. It was easy to talk to smart people. At the very least, there was no need to waste so much time. All right, then I'll make a few requests. At the Dong residence in the capital, as the temporary emperor, Dong Chunhua had been in a rush to get close to him the moment he ascended the throne, and his life had been very smooth these last few years, relying on his ability to see through the Son of Heaven and doing many things to cater to him. He had been promoted again and again. There was now news that he would be replacing the imperial censor of the left, Chen Yi, in the imperial censorate. Although they were both second-rank officials of the imperial court, there were still some differences between the left and the right. One's words carried enormous weight, while the other had to look at the other's eyes. When he had been promoted from left deputy imperial censor to right imperial censor, Dong Chunhua had been extremely satisfied. But it didn't take long for him to have more pursuits, causing him to completely forget his duties. Everything he did was completely behind the acting emperor. Sometimes he even had to play the role of the acting emperor. Now his efforts were about to be repaid. Finally, his dreams were about to come true. How could he not be happy at this moment? Extreme joy begets sorrow. This was Dong Chunhua. Originally, he thought that he would be on the same level as the other ministers, but he never thought that such a thing would happen today. Being humiliated by Yang Qindong wasn't a big deal. After all, he was someone who could even force a minister to death. But the wrong thing was that the loyal duke shouldn't have been assassinated after this, and almost lost his life. Even if Yang Qindong was dead, Dong Chunhua wouldn't be as scared as he was now. After all, what could a dead person do to him? Besides, once such a thing happened, the temporary emperor would definitely put someone like him in an important position and promote him in order to better stabilize the court. The problem was that the person didn't die. Looking at the cause of the matter, it was because he was poisoned by the food he ate that caused the other party to walk out of the Yang family manor, resulting in the assassination this time. Thinking about it from the beginning to the end, it seemed that he was the root of the disaster. Patting his conscience, Dong Chunhua really didn't know that there would be an assassination. Everything was really a coincidence. But now, would anyone believe what he was saying? After knowing that Yang Qindong was surrounded and killed, Dong Chunhua was completely frightened. Following that, he kept praying in his heart, hoping that the assassins would succeed. When the housekeeper who was sent to inquire about the news came back and said that the loyal duke seemed to be injured, but it wasn't a big problem, he plopped back on the chair. He knew that this time he was really finished. Yang Qindong didn't die, and his appearance was too coincidental. There was no way to explain this matter, and presumably no one would be willing to listen to his explanation. Even the temporary emperor wouldn't see him. Otherwise, wouldn't it mean that this matter was related to the emperor? Knowing that no one could save him, Dong Chunhua leaned on the chair like a stall. When the sky was already dark, suddenly there was a huge commotion outside the residence. A group of embroidered uniform guards rushed into the residence like wolves and tigers. The person in the lead was the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Lu Gui. Last time, a group of embroidered uniform guards also rushed into the Hu residence, but the leader was only a Baihu called Tong Lai. Now that Lu Gui had appeared, it was obvious that there was no turning back. Lu Gui flashed the driver's license in his hand. Then he looked at the flustered Dong Chunhua and said, "Master Dong, you are suspected of being involved in the murder of an important official. You are suspected of colluding with a foreign country. Now, please come with us." Since the charges had been laid out, Dong Chunhua naturally wouldn't admit it. He hurriedly shook his head and said, "No, it must be a misunderstanding. Everything is a misunderstanding. I want to see the emperor. I want to see the emperor." Dong Chunhua was still making a final struggle, but Lu Gui wouldn't give him such a chance. His eyes were cold as he shook his head. "Master Dong, You should save these words for the imperial edict and the cold torture instruments. Come, take him away. Dong Chunhua had been taken away. It could be foreseen that such a big thing had happened, almost taking the lives of Jining and the commander of the brocade guards. In addition, Dai Zong also had to take an evasive attitude. His future was already set in stone, and he would die without a doubt. At the same time, in the Yang Manor, the 9 members of the first guard who had died in battle were undergoing a solemn memorial service. Yang Chendong personally attended, his expression solemn. 2 years ago, he had dealt with the Minister of Justice, Yu Shuriwa. 2 years later, another second-rank official was also arrested because he had offended the Duke of Loyalty. Once this matter was out, Yang Chendong's reputation was once again expanded. It also caused more people to fear the Duke from the bottom of their hearts. Not long after this incident, the imperial edict eunuch in the palace went to the Hu residence and announced a series of appointments. He appointed Hu Zhongming as a member of the embroidered uniform guards, secondary 3rd rank. Hu Zhongming was originally a guardian, 5th rank, the right commander of the 5 cities military department, and the general guarding the Yongding Gate. This was the request that Yang Chendong had made to Jining. With this assassination attempt, he had made it clear that he did not trust the Baiming army. Only his own father-in-law could be trusted. In order to repair the relationship between the two sides, Jining expressed his agreement. However, this appointment still had to be reported to the emperor for the final decision. Now that the appointment had been announced, it was a sign that Zhu Qiyu was conceding. Yang Chendong was even more gratified. With these official positions and titles, if anything happened in the capital, the Hu clan would have the power to protect itself. There was no need to worry too much. In the imperial palace, Jining was still kneeling in the main hall, her head lowered, as she faced Zhu Qiyu on the golden dragon throne. She had already listed all of Yang Chendong's new requests. Other than the last one, the Duke of Loyalty's request for the title of king, all of his other requests had been approved. But because this request had not been approved, Jining was forced to remain kneeling on the ground. Rise. Seeing that Jining had been kneeling ever since she had returned, Zhu Qiyu couldn't bear to see her kneeling. Today's incident had nothing to do with Jining, and not only that, she had almost lost her life. Jining gave her thanks and stood up, but she did not leave. She continued to stand with her head lowered. Although she said nothing, her desire for an explanation was obvious. It's impossible to make him king. I'm not as stupid as some people who try to bribe people by making me king of a different surname. Give him a reply. In order to show our sincerity, we can think of other ways to compensate them. Zhu Qiyu's words were resolute and decisive, and there was no room for discussion. There was one more thing that Zhu Qiyu didn't say. For someone like Yang Chendong, even if you gave him the title of king, he wouldn't be able to use it. It would only strengthen his reputation. Therefore, he would never do such a thankless thing. Understanding the emperor's meaning, Jining nodded. Although he was indebted to Yang Chendong for not killing him today, everything he had now was bestowed upon him by the emperor in front of him. Based on this, he was very clear about his position. Very quickly, Jining sent someone to convey the emperor's intentions. He tactfully rejected the request to be conferred the title of king, saying that the time was not right. Then, he proposed that in the future, the supply of provisions to the first city could be transported from Tianjin to the capital. From there, they could directly leave Juyong Pass and pass through Xian Manor and Talu City. Northern Ming would not set up any obstacles, and the mercenaries would only need to pay the required amount of money to pass through. Chapter 818. When Yang Chendong saw this news, he was in his study room. Standing beside him was the cautious director of the Security Bureau, Yang San. The previous director was Ming. Later, because he had too many things to do, he completely put down this part-time job. Young Sandy concentrated his power, and because of this, he did a lot of big things. Of course, it was inevitable that there were some mistakes. Don't look at how the words of the Security Bureau carried weight, and everyone was afraid of him. But when he stood beside Yang Chendong, he was very obedient and stood obediently. Unless the sixth young master asked, he didn't dare to say a word. "Tell me," Yang Chendong asked casually as he threw the booklet Jean Ing had sent onto the table. He leaned back in his chair and asked casually. There was only Yang San in the room. Of course, this question was asked to him. The director of the Security Bureau didn't answer immediately. He first thought about it before replying, "At present, this is a very beneficial thing for both sides. We lack things, and they lack money. This can be considered a win-win situation." Yang Chendong nodded gently. "At present, this is the case. We should also seize this opportunity to transport more things from Chichen City to the origin city. If one day the two sides have a falling out, we won't have to worry about the problem of food. Of course, the Security Bureau must pay attention to this matter and closely monitor the movements of all sides in the capital. Once there is a change in the situation, immediately make countermeasures and preparations." "Yes." Yang Sen nodded heavily. "By the way, what do you plan to do over there?" Yang Chendong's chin moved slightly toward the south. After the Security Bureau used a lot of manpower and material resources, a telegram soon came from the capital of the southern Ming dynasty. Although there was not enough evidence to prove it, various clues had pointed to Chao Yen, the adopted son of the chief eunuch Chao Jixiang. Yang Sen just reported this matter to the sixth young master. "Young master, we have come up with a few plans to deal with the southern Ming Empire's ministers. There is also a plan to deal with Chao Jixiang himself. This subordinate thinks that we can give it a try." Yang Sen carefully probed. As Yang Xie's power continued to expand, he found that he couldn't understand his young master anymore. Yang Chendong's mouth twitched slightly after hearing this. Give him a taste of his own medicine? It seems feasible, but the success rate is too low. They will definitely be more careful. If we do this, not only will we not be able to kill them, but the strength of the Security Bureau's elites will also be damaged. It's not appropriate. Listening to Yang Chendong's concern for the Security Bureau, Yang Sen said gratefully, "Thank you, young master, for your concern, but are we going to do nothing?" That's not a bad suggestion." Yang Chendong suddenly laughed. Yang San was stunned when he heard this. He just said it casually, but why did the sixth young master take it seriously? Yang Chendong seemed to see the hesitation on Yang San's face. He chuckled and said, "Sometimes the greatest deterrent effect is to raise your hand but not drop it." Yang Sen quickly nodded in relief after hearing this sentence. "I understand. Young master wants to hang a knife over their heads, but not drop it. Let them live in fear and anxiety every day." "That's right." Yang Chendong finally laughed. If they really killed a few ministers, the Security Bureau could do it by paying a price. However, if they did that, it would be too easy for them. They might as well do nothing and make the other party suspicious. Even if they had to scare them half to death, it would be better. We don't have to kill people, but we can't do nothing. Otherwise, there will be no end to this. How about this? Send a telegram to my fourth brother and tell him to raise the prices of all the merchants from the southern Ming Empire by 5% as a warning. The smile on Yang Chendong's face faded, replaced by a trace of anger under his calm expression. Killing 9 of his soldiers and seriously injuring Yang Si, this matter couldn't be settled so easily. a 5% increase was enough to give the southern Ming merchants a headache. This way, not only could Crimson City earn more money, but it could also weaken the economic strength of the southern Ming Empire. It could be considered killing two birds with one stone. When Yang Sen heard the 5% increase in the price of goods, his heart couldn't help but tighten. This was a good thing, but wouldn't Lord Yangtze's safety be worried? However, before he could ask the question in his heart, Yang Chendong had already replied, "Don't worry, nothing will happen to my fourth brother. After all, the other party did something wrong this time, so they won't bother about this matter. Other than obediently admitting their mistakes, they have no other choice. If they really have the guts to make a move on my fourth brother, then all of their business channels into the southern Ming Empire will be cut off. At that time, the ones crying will only be themselves. If they did something wrong, they had to be prepared to accept the punishment. If they continued to make mistakes, then they would be seeking death." Yang Chendong could see this point. Presumably, Emperor Ingzong of the southern Ming Empire and the ministers under him could also see it clearly. Right now, the southern Ming Empire wasn't peaceful, and its territory was shrinking. With Min Zhuangwang and the others eyeing the southwest covetously, if they were smart, they wouldn't provoke him. Otherwise, it would be equivalent to forcing the mercenaries to join hands with Zhu Huizhen. In the new year of 1453 AD, Yang Chendong spent the new year in the Yang family manor. Even though an assassination had just happened, the manor had already made preparations, so the New Year's atmosphere was still very lively. A party that had been prepared for a long time diluted the previous assassination and made many people smile again. 9 days later, on the 9th day of the first month of the new year, Yang Chendong and his group left the Yang family manor and went from the outskirts of the capital to the Juyong Pass. Along with them were the 200 teachers and students of the Yang family academy, as well as the 2 madams and 7th sister Yang duo. It could be said that after leaving, the Yang family manor was basically empty, other than the housekeeper Yang Nung, who stayed behind to take care of the business. Only the servant Yang Lu stayed behind to handle the communication with the southern Ming Empire. Other than the 2 madams, Yang Chendong only brought along 7th sister Yang duo, who was already alone. The reason for this was because the other brothers and sisters had already settled down here. They couldn't leave as they wished like Yang duo. Yang Chendong tacitly agreed to the choice of his brothers and sisters. Perhaps if they stayed, Ming would feel more at ease. As for whether or not they would act against his family when the relationship between the 2 sides broke down, he wasn't too worried. After all, these family members had lived in the capital for many years and had a certain amount of resources. Moreover, their father was Yang Rong, so they would probably have to think twice before acting. Moreover, with the help of Hu Shao, Su Yozhen, and the others, the outcome wouldn't be too bad. When the time came, he would make arrangements in advance. Speaking of Su Yozhen, after that sudden conversation, he had finally adjusted his position. No matter how much he didn't think highly of the mercenary ship, he had already boarded it and could not back down. The only thing he could do was think about how to make this ship sail even further. Solving this problem could be considered a great harvest from this trip to the capital. Not long after Yang Chendong's group left the capital, another group quickly caught up. They first brushed shoulders with the Yang clan's group, and then they overtook them and took the lead. This group was led by Deng Chong, the eunuch of the Xian residence. During the negotiations, the 2 sides had already made it clear that Tulu City would be handed over to Northern Ming. This was a kind of goodwill that Yang Chendong expressed, and also an explanation to the people of the world. That was, the mercenaries were actually fighting for the Great Ming, fighting for the world. Only by doing this could the voices of the people gradually die down. Only by doing this could Zhu Qiu stabilize the situation in the court, concentrate on developing himself, and provide a safe supply route for the mercenaries. Deng Chang's group slowly advanced forward. They had no choice but to move slowly. The Yang clan's group had brought far too many things, and there were also many women in the group. Thus, moving faster was an extravagant hope. Fortunately, after the new year, the weather was slowly warming up, and there were no more incidents of people getting frostbite on the road. With Deng Chang's group at the front, the road was green without any accidents. They passed through Jiyong Pass and arrived at the Xian residence. 1 month later, they arrived at the Xian residence. Speaking of which, the Xian residence was Deng Chang's territory, and he had set up a banquet to entertain his guests. Yang Qindong once more met with the commander of the bureau, Shi Wanshan. Compared to the last time, Shi Wanshan's face was much more cordial this time. After all, when he received the guests last time, he still had to consider the opinions of his superiors. However, this time, he was receiving the orders of his superiors. The atmosphere between them was much more relaxed. In this meeting, Yang Qindong had brought up the problem of the Han people's lives and status. He had bluntly pointed out that the Han people should have been the strongest people in the world, and that all other races should serve the Han people. Anyone who made the lives of the people so miserable that they couldn't even solve the problem of food and clothing was a piece of trash that should be reprimanded by the people of the world. In response to Yang Qindong's words, Shi Wanshan could only smile apologetically and nod his head. He was only a general temporarily residing in the Xian residence. When it came to the lives of the people, there wasn't much he could do, but he could still see Yang Qindong's domineering aura from these words, and a thought flashed through his mind. It seemed that it was a blessing for the Han people for such a person to become the ruler of the Han people. Naturally, this thought only flashed through his mind. He was now a second-rank general in the Ming army. Since he was paid by others, he had to work for them. This was a principle that hadn't changed since ancient times. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.